Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's 10 a.m. I think we can now commence our board meeting, please. This is a meeting in public, obviously not a public meeting, and members of the public will be able to ask questions at the end about the business of the meeting. We're also live on MS Teams, and can I ask colleagues that when you speak, to press the microphone button in front of you to say contribute whatever you need to contribute, and then could you immediately turn off your microphone to allow others then to have their say, because it's otherwise it overloads work as well as it should. We want to make sure there's a good recording available as well. Now, and there's an echo somewhere.
If we just pause for a minute, are we just checking, Mark, that we're getting the sound through Teams?
Just in the process of doing that now. We will need some sound from someone just brief.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we can use the apologies for absence. I've not been notified of any apologies for absence, and Steve Lennox, our Improvement Director, is on leave. We have the minutes of the meeting, of our last meeting, in front of you. Are there any amendments? None have been notified to me. Are you happy then to accept them as a true and accurate record? Thank you. If I could then hand over to Peter for the action log.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll just quickly run through the updates as recorded in the log, just very quickly. So the first one related to the BAF and the cross-reference to the IQR is now completed. So the BAF in the pack has relevant references to the SPC charts. The next action regarding system. How the system is going to manage issues affecting our response to patients that we picked up on the agenda on combination of the Chief Executive report and under the operational performance item later. Next action is in relation to the clinical education business case, and I'll just want to hand over, I think, either to Emma and or Martin just for a verbal update on that.
The clinical education business case, we've been reviewing it for some time. We're making sure it's aligned with our requirements in terms of new staff we're getting, and we've recruited less staff this year. But the basic business case requires more alignment, and we will be feeding the additional resource into the budget over the next few months to make sure it aligns with what we need. So we're doing it carefully where we need to. And only spending the money we can afford at the moment.
I think the one other thing just to add is in some of that planning we're looking at our skill mix, because it will depend very much on the skill mix that we're looking forward to recruiting as to how that clinical education structure needs to be set up. Obviously, our registrants come through universities, and we know that there's an increasingly strong market for them outside ambulance service as well. So that puts us in a position of needing to compete more for the registrants, but needing to think also about our non-registrant workforce, which would then potentially have an impact on what the clinical education structure needs to look like.
Okay, so moving on, action on the log next relating to a challenge from the board actually in September. About patient safety and in particular welfare calls that will be covered later in the agenda under keeping patients safe. The IQR, so there was a request that the IQR includes confirmation where a metric has no target by design, and that's now included in the version before the board. The board asked last time that E&B reviews the reasons driving high sickness rates to ensure a clearer understanding and making sure that then the right actions are being taken. That will be picked up under the improving culture section of the agenda later, Chair. Then there were some actions. There were three then actions, one for WWC, two for QPS. So the first one for WWC about appraisals and leadership management training courses that was considered by at the last meeting of WWC as set out in the report to board that we'll come to later. And then at the QPS meeting last, it covered the approach to harm reviews and the outputs of the quality summit, again both reflected in the QPS report and that we picked up on the agenda. And then finally, at the last board meeting, there was a request that the audit committee receives assurance about the processes of recording Food Speak Up cases on Datex. This is being picked up by the audit committee and it will be covered at its next meeting. In the meantime, additional metrics have been included in the current IQR on the number of Food Speak Up cases that are reported. Thank you.
Rob?
Just to make a point, Chair, that I am no longer considering Datex as a method of collecting freedom to speak up data. So we've got a separate database that's supported by our BI team that will do that effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleased to hear that. Thank you. Any other points then, Peter? Are we clear?
Yeah, that's the actions, and the others are for future meetings.
Super.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question about the clinical education business case and the alignment. Do we have a time frame for when that's going to be completed, please?
I would expect the alignment to be complete by the middle of January, because the bulk of the planning will be complete by that point. So we'll have agreed what the numbers look like, and then we can make sure it's the clinical education funding is right size for the numbers that we need.
Okay, thank you. If you're content, we'll move on to the next item. I'll take my report next, which is before you. Just want to again to confirm from the report that that we've in my report sets the context for the meeting, building on the approach that we piloted in September. So that's aimed to help us make sure we discuss the right things and make sure that the discussion is focused, particularly, and make sure it's in line with our strategic goals. We'll also be using the assurance cycle, which is detailed in the report. And again, I'd encourage board members to refer to that to ensure when you're hearing information today, when you want to challenge where we are in dealing with particular issues, again, please refer back to the assurance cycle to ensure that we are dealing with things in the right way. And this all builds on the recommendations of the board effectiveness review. And again, we set out in the reports how we want to use certain key information in the meeting, and reference this review is ongoing. You know, we're continually under review at the moment about how the board works and making ourselves more effective. So that's it's going to be a key item, both of underpinning today's meeting, but also over the coming months. And in terms of board development, I think PC is going to summarise a number of steps that we've taken as a board to progress this matter.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, there's a short paper in the pack which effectively, first of all, summarises the development the board's undertaken this year to date. It then proposes the focus of the 3 remaining sessions taking us to April, so January, February, and March. This is linked. This will be linked to the Culture and Leadership Programme the board agreed in August, and the board's specific role in setting the organisational culture. Steve Lennox is on well-deserved leave today. Our improvement director has engaged the NHS England's culture transformation lead to help support the board with this, and more detailed plans will come over the coming days. But as I set out in the paper, the plan will be to use our Leadership Way framework that's been developed by the NHS Leadership Academy, and then the areas of forward focus for the board development from April onwards. So culture will take us to March. Then from April, the focus will be determined by the outputs of the well-led self-assessment, again that Steve Lennox is helping to facilitate, and that will conclude in January. So what we're asking in the paper, Chair, is for the board to agree the plan for its areas of focus of development between January and March, and then to note that a paper setting out the proposed development plan from April 23 onwards will come to the board meeting on the 6th of April.
So, colleagues, we're a unitary board. It's designed for every member of the board to make sure the board works effectively. So, are you content this programme is sufficient to help us with our development? So, some yeses will be helpful as well as the nods. Again, for the benefit of the microphone.
Yes.
It's a positive affirmation. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Just also now to move on to set the scene for the meeting as well. I mean, this is traditionally, one could argue that winter has never ended in the NHS, and we've seen we've been on continual sort of high level of alert since last winter. The summer particularly was extremely challenging at times. And really the context for today's meeting is we are about to enter the Christmas and New Year holiday, when traditionally demand does spike for emergency services within the NHS, compounded by added challenges of industrial action that is scheduled to take place over the coming weeks. So that's an important backdrop, and I think it's important that we just ensure that today the board, we are, all of us are just testing to make sure that we've made all the plans we can, that we've made everything we can to make our patients safe and keep our staff supported, but recognise we're in a particularly challenging time in both the development of CCAM but also in terms of the NHS. But that's an important background, the meeting, and the focus particularly, as you say, let's keep our patients safe. I know my non-executive colleagues have been very busy out and about the patch as well in terms of leadership visits, and we'll hear about those reports in due course. And again, that will form some of the backdrop, I think, some of the questions and comments today. I was in the headquarters in Crawley on Tuesday, and I was struck particularly in talking to staff in 111 who lead 111, the excessive demand that's being placed currently on our services there, where I'm advised that call levels are something like 2.5 times what we would normally expect within the 111 call centres, and particularly driven by the Strep A concerns wider in the community. So, our staff are working under extreme pressure currently, both within 111 but also continually on our provision of other 909 services as well. So I think that certainly is something we are very conscious of as a board. We've also been listening carefully to our Council of Governors and the key issues that they wanted to make sure are raised. And again, the themes are reflected on today's agenda, but again, so important in terms of our development of an appropriate culture in CCAM, staff welfare issues. And I know colleagues have been working really hard to ensure our staff are supported, and it's good to see some of the work that's going on there to ensure our staff are supported over the holiday period in particular, but also in terms of some of the harder issues to do with appraisals and the impact of the move to Medway. So again, that will feature, but obviously our staff welfare is very much in our mind today. And also we've issues to do with patient safety, and again we will return to recruitment issues and the challenges we face there. And again, that will come out as part of the report. And so they're all in the agenda. And finally, to confirm the plans in place in terms of succession, as it were, we have Council of Governors have appointed a new replacement non-executive director. The name of that person will be announced in the coming weeks when we've done, subject to the usual checks, but they've approved that appointment. We've also appointed a chief medical officer, again subject to appropriate checks, and that announcement will be made in the near future. And that is obviously to replace Fiona, who will be going on to retirement in the near future. We've also commenced the recruitment process for a substantive chief executive. That will be in the hands of our recruitment consultants early next week, and they will then proceed against an agreed timetable with intentions to interview in February for that position, to make the post to get a candidate for a substantial appointment. And finally, the Chief Financial Officer vacancy, it will be interviewed after we've appointed a Chief Executive. But in the meantime, we're grateful to Martin for his leadership in the interim period. So thank you for that. So if there's no more issues I wish to raise, can I hand over to Peter for to Michael for the Audit Risk Committee report?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. I'll take the paper as read, but I just want to draw the board's attention to two particular items. The first is the annual assessment of EPRR. That's the emergency planning, I think, response resilience. There is an annual assessment each year, and the assessment this year provided a rating of substantial compliance, which is an improvement on 21-22. where we were partially compliant, and a copy is provided for the board's information. We also, as a committee, received a good paper from Emma, which is looking at how we are responding to the implications of the review into the Manchester bombings. This is very important in the context of making sure that all those that we serve are safe and that we are capable of responding. Like many trusts, I think there has been a gap in EPR testing during COVID. So how we would literally respond to something like the Manchester bombing, there is still more work to be done. There is a residual risk here. We know that these incidents don't happen with great frequency, but nevertheless they can happen. And like all boards across the NHS, we carry that risk, but we are very mindful of that risk and how we continue to manage it so that we protect and ensure that we can provide the service that we need for our patients. The second item that I just want to draw to your attention is risk management. We focused on this in particular because it forms part of the warning notices that were given by CQC. The observation of, well, the conclusion of the committee is this. A lot of excellent work has been done, and I pay tribute to Rob and his team. I think we're in a better place. There are 3 areas, however, where I think there is still need for continued development. This is not a criticism. I think given the amount of elapsed time since we decided that we needed to focus more on our risk management, the amount of elapsed time is relatively short. So a lot has been achieved in that time period. But the 3 areas I would focus on, first and foremost, is it's the way in which people within CCAMP, particularly at the front line, record risk. I think there's been substantial improvement in DATEX and people's understanding of this and how they report clinical risk when they observe it. I think as a committee and as a board, we need further assurance that this is now fully embedded within the organisation, that people understand it, and we've got a good insight into the quality of the information that is being provided and how well we draw out systemic issues and how we respond. The second issue responds really to, I was very struck by a point that CQC said in their analysis of us, which as a board, we needed to be a bit more curious in the way in which we look at things and the way in which we review performance. In my wider experience across Whitehall and internationally, when you have a strategic risk register, it is really important that you begin to draw out systemic issues. You begin to look at the joining up of the dots. What is that telling you, rather than focusing on the individual functional risk? And so I think there is more to be done in looking at strategic risks, looking at how they align, and are they telling us something much wider about the organisation, both internally and externally. And not surprisingly, if you look at the current risk, the corporate risk register, the underlying issue in there is patient safety, and that's been an incredible focus that we've been giving for the last couple of months. So I think we need to do more in that space. And then the final point I'd make is we looked at both the BAF and the corporate risk register, which is what I'm very much used to doing in other audit committees which I chair. I would say the underlying logic of the risk register in terms of its focus on patients is very strong. A lot of work has been done to look at long-term solutions, long-term risks that would enable us to deliver a better service to patients, and it touches on capability and all of those important things. The only observation I would say is that when you read the risk register, and don't forget it is an external document that comes to this board, so our stakeholders, whether they're governors, patients, members of parliament, or the wider system, I think the risk register could be a little bit more explicit in terms of how it focuses on patients. Now that is a development need. I want to stress that the underlying structure and content of the risk register is good, but I do think its presentation could be improved further. I was very pleased to note that the executive and the audit committee were at one on this, and this is an ongoing development for the future. But overall, Chair, I think it was a good audit committee and we got the assurance that we needed.
Thank you, Michael. I'll just give the opportunity for board colleagues to comment further if they wish. David?
Thank you. Michael, on the EPRR, what's your take? Because obviously we had a CQC inspection on our resiliency. which came up with different conclusions, and we had a number of recommendations come from that report. Yet we have an internal audit report that says that we are getting assurance. So how do we reconcile the two? And is there a broader point here around what's the role of internal audit in helping us achieve ongoing compliance?
I think what I'm looking, David, from my wider experiences, I would actually take the 3 reviews, and I think we're doing that. Look at the recommendations. I think there's something around interpretation. I think there's something about reconciling different perspectives, but just focusing on what is the underlying risk. And I think if we focused on that, we would get alignment. And I think Emma knows what those risks are, as does Fiona. It is about resourcing our ability to respond as quickly as we could, and looking at some of our command and control systems. And I also think there's some scope for doing a little bit more stress testing. I'm not saying practical stress testing, but a little bit of gaming what would happen in different scenarios. So I think we could do a little bit more of that. But I don't think it's a fundamental issue. And I would stress again, if you look across the wider NHS, and I was talking about this to somebody at the Foundation Trust, it is an issue that all trusts are facing at the moment because of lack of resources. We know that risk is out there. We just need to be ready for it as best as we can. I don't know if that's answered your question, but I think, Emma, you wanted to say.
Are you in there? Okay. Thank you. I think the challenge here is they're audited in slightly different ways because of the way that they're set up. So the EPRR assurance is part of the national core standards, which comes down historically through NHS England, but now through the ICBs. It's about the accountability of where that assurance sits, and actually looks at a vast range of different metrics. I think when CQC come in, they obviously do the review on the day, but I think it's about they look at similar things but from slightly different angles and slightly different levels of granularity in particular areas. So absolutely on the day that CQC came, there were some issues that were identified, and appropriately we've been given some actions to do. Those are very similar to some of the actions that were already in train for improvement within our core standards. We just haven't managed to complete them in time. So I think they do absolutely intersect, but I think to some extent the annual core assurance, it is a more comprehensive and detailed across HART and EPRR in its totality. But I think they do interact that way, and some of the findings were, the pieces were already in train.
Peter wants to comment?
No, I think Emma's covered. I was just going to clarify because David mentioned internal audit, so the review wasn't an internal audit, it was an audit by NHS England and ICS.
In summary, I think what the audit committee's brought out is an important matter. I think we can take assurance this has got attention of the organisation and attention of the wider healthcare system, and whilst I think it's our job as a board to make sure all the various advice is harmonised, so we get the CCAM interpretation of all of this helpful advice and review to make sure that we have resilient plans, because these things never happen when we want them to happen. They happen. We've got to make sure our plans are stress tested, so what I'm sensing here is not only that this needs to be kept under the board's attention, but we need a clear improvement programme, a clear programme of various improvements, and I think note as well as we get into budget setting and objectives for next year. There's clearly a challenge of resources, but this one issue we need to make sure is prominent. Fiona?
Yes, just picking up Michael's point about scenario planning, I think it's worthwhile reflecting that we made real steps to do that in the Quality Summit, where we identified the specific areas where we see patient harm, and going forward that will be a regular 6-monthly occurrence, and I think we can pick up the various different scenarios, not just the ones that occur on a day-to-day basis, but also some of the planning for the major instance should they occur.
Thank you. And I think as we may out of COVID and get back to sort of more, in inverted commas, normal working, I think it really is. It's important that we just keep this item in focus. So grateful for the work that's been undertaken. Other questions before we conclude?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick comment that I was going to ask Michael on your second point about the board being curious. Now, are you sure that there has been significant progress in terms of that particular issue?
I think you can never stop being sufficiently curious. That would be my issue. My experience, and I know as non-executives we all sit on different boards, a good board is one that joins the dots, looks at different pieces of information and begins to say, well, you know, is there something wider there? And I think we could do a bit more of that. But I do think the training that we've been going through, that has been provided by, I forget who it is, NHS England, whoever, was a start in that process. You have to be a bit too, can't be too linear. And also what I'd say is that there's a lot of experience in this room. The advice that people have given me before is go with your gut reaction. If you think something's not right, you need to ask that question as a non-executive. And I think we're beginning to do that. Start with patience, look at it, and follow through on that basis. But I'd be interested, Chris, from your wider experience, there must be something behind that question. Do you think we are being curious?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I think, you know, what has really happened, particularly in the past sort of few months, really, is the training that we have received. And I think that has really generated a lot of interest and a lot of curiosity, which I think if we can maintain that trajectory, I think we'll be at a good place. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
I was just going to follow through to say, do we have a date by which we would be comfortable? Is there an end date to this?
Could you clarify what end date to what, sorry?
To sort of full assurance on the various outstanding issues on both the improvement journey aspect and the EPRR.
Well, I look to Peter, who is a very good Secretary to the Audit Committee. I recall that we are going to continue to review it over the next couple of months, and certainly on risk is a standing item on the agenda, and I would want to continue to focus on that. I want to give the executive a bit of time to continue to take this forward. So I think the next meeting is in February, Peter, I'm not sure, and we would look for progress then. I'm very keen, though, as you say, Howard, that for all the activities that we have underway, we need a plan with a deadline, and we review it. And I think that is a learning point that the executive and the board could take.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Rob, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just part of curiosity is around the information that is presented to us and the way it's presented. And how that's presented in the report. And if we look at the risk management process, and thanks to the Audit Committee for receiving and giving comments back, we have actually took a step approach to how we got to where we are to today. So one significant step is actually around the how the corporate risk register looks and feels like at the moment. So we've incorporated 12 plus risk, which beforehand didn't receive the visibility of the EMB committees and the board. So that's quite a significant change, and how the committees are able to look at organizational risk and not just sort of a small portion of risk. So some of the things that in terms of next year, and Michael is right in terms of how do we get risk management down to frontline staff so that they understand how to report it, how it's managed, and how they get feedback. It's one of my key things that I'm taking forward in Q4.
I think everyone, just to check, any final comments or sum up finally? David?
Just in your report, Michael, one of the things that is written is the review of the data quality internal audit, which came back with reasonable assurance. And one of the recommendations, because we touch on it in the AQR, which I'd like to draw the attention of the board to, is that is bad for AQI metrics, which rely heavily on the cleric system in the CAD, and all of that is in the data warehouse. But that represents about 25% of the metrics that we need to be able to really get assurance that we are driving across quality, patient safety, workforce information, etc. So I think that's one that we just need to be aware of, that whilst we receive reasonable assurance on the systems we have in place, we still have a gap in that a majority of the data systems that we need to be able to do the right granular work we want to do at all levels of the organization is not in the data warehouse. That's a journey we're going to be going through in the next couple of months, but that will be a concerted exercise. So I think just for the board's visibility, and that's reflected in the IQR introduction, because we talk about what next steps look like for that.
Could I ask just one very quick question? I don't go into detail. I think there's a proportionality question there about what is it we need, and is it 75%, 80%, or 50% of data? I mean, there is a cost related to this. and we need to think that through. But I certainly agree, moving to the cloud would enable us to do a lot more, and I think that is part of our long-term data strategy.
Absolutely, and we're having those conversations with Martin as part of that. So that there is an ongoing piece of work that the team are doing. So because we're not going to introduce the IQR, but it is in the introduction of the IQR. I will be pausing development of the IQR within a lot of strides and improvements in the IQR from a data perspective. I want to give the team the opportunity to start focusing on development of the more granular reports we will need across the organization. So we will focus on the narrative from an IQR development perspective, and then we will introduce more changes to the IQR once we've done the more granular work across the data sets. But I think that's important that we're aware of where we're on the journey.
Thank you. Just to conclude then, we formally received the report from the chairman of the audit committee. We note that risk management processes are under review, are being improved, and are very much integral to the improvement journey. And we note the progress with our resilience and emergency planning, but recognise that's an ongoing development issue, and the board are assured the matter is being attended to. What we want to see going forward, and we'll bring it back to the next meeting, is milestones and a plan to, so again with discussions regarding appropriate resourcing to the programme to ensure that we can further develop our resilience in emergency planning, and clearly important matter, but also we are governed by available resources as well, and we just need to make sure that we have an appropriate discussion to ensure that we make the right investments going forward. So thank you for that detailed report. If I can move on, what I should have said, I omitted to mention at the start of the meeting, is the declarations of interest are on the table. They're in your pack. Are there any other additional declarations? You've a detailed declarations of interest. I'll make sure they're in front of every board meeting in future, so that governs our, that ensures that all various interests are declared, and please notify if there are any additional ones. So thank you for that. Moving on, if we may, to the Chief Executive's report. Siobhan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read, but there's probably four key things to draw out to the board today. Just building on the conversation we had from the audit committee report and Rob's reflection under the executive management board, I just wanted to say that I think the progress around risk reporting at executive level has been significant in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So huge amount of effort I know has been undertaken in order to change our approach to our risk management policy, migrate our data to a different cloud-based software system, Datex Web, train our people. As Michael said, this is very much a journey that I think probably never has an end point or a destination. So we need to continually remind our people of the significant importance of how to capture risks, how to write them into the risk register, and how to mitigate them effectively. So what I will say is the Executive Management Board now receives a regular report of all risks that score 12 and above, and you'll see for the first time in the board assurance framework today, the board will now regularly receive a section of the BAF that covers all operational risks that are scored 15 and above. So I think we've got real clarity of kind of governance and reporting around risk between executive management board, audit committee and trust board. So really very good progress. The second point I wanted to draw the board's attention to is under the regional issues around the IT outage. So since we met publicly as a board at the end of October, it feels right to publicly state that we had a critical incident related to the IT outage on the 10th of November. The teams on the ground, both the support teams, the IT teams, and the operational and clinical teams did a fantastic job of working in real adversity. I was in the Crawley Emergency Operations Centre on Tuesday and heard what it felt like for the staff to have to move from Crawley to Coxheath, how they did that, how they looked after the welfare of staff, how they ensured that the transport was effective, that hotels were booked to ensure people could rest and come back to work. So a fantastic team endeavour, I think, to keep the operations running. That said, we need to be assured as a board that that type of critical incident won't happen again. So we have some investigations underway. You'll see from the report that the outage was hardware failure, and the bits of hardware have been replaced. They were due to be replaced anyway. We were on a planned phase of replacing because we knew that the infrastructure lacked resilience. Sadly, the IT outage happened around about 2 weeks before that final switch to the new kit. So I think to provide assurance to the board that the new kit has been deemed to be more resilient. It was already planned to replace the old kit, but we are undertaking internal debriefs and root cause analysis to ensure that we've covered all bases to provide assurance to both executive and board level that this type of incident won't happen again. We will also in January seek some external perspectives on our internal review so that we've got more reassurance of the lessons learned and the plans that are in place. The third area I wanted to cover is just building on the chair's opening comments around operational performance. So we should not understate the significant operational pressures that the teams are under at the moment. There is a relentless focus on patient safety, and our people are doing their best in real adversity. We continue to be in REAP 4. We're in our highest level of escalation with huge numbers of calls coming into the 999 and the 111 service. And the reason that this is important for us to acknowledge is, I think from our perspective as a board, to say thank you to our people for their continued efforts. And we hear that people go above and beyond all day, every day at the moment. And that creates a level of fatigue that I think we need to acknowledge on the back of the difficult couple of years that have preceded. So the operational pressures are significant. We mentioned at the start in the action log the role of our ICB partners. So I just wanted to touch on the types of things that I'm involved in. So I meet with the ICB chief executives on a regular basis every 4 to 6 weeks. And I think the themes that have been coming up there is what does CCAM need of our system partners? So there's a real, I think, acknowledgement of the health and social care systems challenges and how they present in the ambulance sector, rather than a focus on what is the ambulance sector's performance and what is CCAM's performance in the context of the wider sector. So I think the types of things that have been discussed are quite obviously how the ICBs are providing assurance that access to primary care is as good as it can currently be, that the hospital handover delays are held to an absolute minimum, and that the focus on partnership with local government is creating innovative solutions to discharging people out of the acute trust and the community beds as well, so that the front door emergency department flow through the hospital can be improved. There is funding that has come in from government to expedite some of the plans around delayed discharges, and local government and ICBs are sharing both the financial allocations and the accountability for the solutions, and I've been party to some of those discussions. That said, I think all systems recognise that workforce is the biggest rate limiting factor, and in the adult social care market that continues to be a challenge with residential and nursing homes and care homes sadly at times not able to continue as independent businesses with the staffing crisis that exists. So there are significant system challenges. I think Sussex, as the future lead commissioner, are starting to coordinate with Surrey and Kent, I think, a bit more. An example of that is they have established a weekly chief executives winter board, and in talking to the chief executives last night in Sussex, there's a real palpable difference in the level of understanding, I think, about those issues that I've just described and their impact on patients, and the impact of the delays in ambulance response times. So, and I've asked that Sussex are coordinating with Kent and Surrey on the plans for winter so that we've got assurance in all of our delivery footprints. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is in industrial action, and I felt it was important to express the current operational challenges, because the context that we're starting from is not normal, and the impending strike action is also not normal. So we have further adversity to deal with. That said, the negotiations have been constructive with the GMB union colleagues. We concluded negotiations yesterday, and I would say that it felt like a partnership approach to agreeing how to manage both the two critical factors that are at play here. The first is a mutual concern around patient safety, which was expressed a number of times. The second is the legal right to strike that the GMB members have exercised through their voting in the ballot, and they had overwhelmingly high numbers of their membership voting in favour of full strike. So in the negotiations, our balancing positions were respecting the legal right to strike, which has been exercised, and in equal measure trying to come up with some ways in which we can mitigate the risk to patients for the industrial action next Wednesday. So we were able to put a joint communication statement out late yesterday. Board colleagues, many will have seen, but just to impress some of the key messages from that, we have agreed derogations which are local exemptions from strike, and the GMB are working hard with their membership to get to the levels of derogations that we've mutually agreed. So at a high level, Emergency Operations Centre and 111, we have agreed with the GMB 75% derogations of their membership in those two delivery areas, and in field operations we've agreed 50% derogation of their membership. So those percentages of staff the GMB are now working with to provide assurance to us that they can achieve those members of staff to be present on shift next Wednesday. The final thing I'll say about industrial action is, in addition to the derogation agreements, we also have agreement from the GMB that for a certain type of calls, if there are no ambulances available to dispatch, they will dispatch from the picket line. So their members have agreed that for the most serious incidents, if there is no alternative available in that area, there will be a process by which the job will be sent to the local operating unit, and the GMB and CCAM will work together to contact the coordinator at the picket line, and that members of staff who are striking will honour the commitment that GMB and CCAM have made around patient safety, and will go to a certain categorisation of calls from the picket line. So we have some safeguards in train. We also have, so one mitigation is around the picket line, and then the last thing I'll say is there's been a national agreement to draw the military in to support with the industrial action. CCAM is one of the trusts that has military personnel designated to us, and that will provide us with a further mitigation in the field operations area of the business, as they will be, the military personnel will be able to drive ambulances and work in partnership with clinical staff at CCAM to respond to calls. So those are probably the two key mitigations: the ability to dispatch people from the picket line if things get really difficult, and also to bring people from the picket line into EOC if we get to an unmanageable call level, and then the second mitigation around military personnel. I'll pause there, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Siobhan. That's a very, very full report. Can I just ask board colleagues then, given there was a number of themes in Siobhan's colleague, we just make sure we focus our questions appropriately. So the first sort of chunky item that Siobhan mentioned was around risk management and changes to the risk management process. Are there any questions or comments you want to make about that, or are you assured that we are making progress in that area? Are you content with what you heard? Just important to know, because I think thank you, Siobhan, for your leadership of that matter with Rob and the team for the changes that have been made and the acceleration of risk, as it were, to ensure it's appropriately in the outline and the board can be appropriately advised with that process. So thank you for that. The other substantial item was the IT outage, and again you've heard a full report on that. But no, do the board, any board members wish to seek further assurance regarding the steps that we're taking around IT? Please, Subo first, then Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Siobhan, I was just wondering, you mentioned that you are doing the look back exercise to look at the amount of patient harm, and you've got somebody, I think you said, coming in January who's independently going to look back. I just wondered what sort of time frame they're working towards, when we will get that report, and who will see that. Will that come straight back to board?
So I'll draw Martin in, but there's probably two parallel pieces of work that are happening. So from a patient safety and patient harm perspective, the quality governance team are doing what we would always do, i.e. checking over a period of time that was from the 10th of November, whether there were any increases in serious incidents, patient complaints, or any other incidents that we are picking up from our existing governance mechanisms to determine whether there was adverse impact at exactly the time that the IT outage happened. So that is very much an internal exercise, probably baked into the existing quality business as usual processes. That will be overseen by the Quality Patient Safety Committee in terms of the normal serious incident and triangulation reports there. The piece that we feel that, and it was a request at Audit Committee as well, that needs some external perspective, is the more technical issues related to why the IT outage happened, and from a technical perspective outside of the organisation, the ask at Audit Committee, which was absolutely right, I think, was how are we assured that from a technical perspective this type of IT outage won't happen again? And whilst we can determine that from an internal review, I think it's prudent, because of the significant impact it had to the operations of the business and how reliant CCAM is on the technical capabilities that we have, that there's an external expertise that looks at the internal review of the technical IT outage. Does anything to add, Martin, on that?
Yeah, a couple of things, one of which is the whole organisation responded really well. It shows how good it is to responding under crisis during that period. We've done the initial IT outage review from a technical perspective. That will now feed into our joint review about the overall outage and how that managed. And then there will be a third element. We worked with London Ambulance Service during the outage. We talked to them, and they managed to provide us with 2 network senior engineers who helped us during the process, and we're going to involve them in a part of the external review to make sure we're not missing anything in terms of what we can learn in lessons from this outage. It showed the critical nature of the IT infrastructure to us operating. It's a bit like going from bank tellers to cash machines. You can't go back easily for any sustained period once you've done that. So we'll be focusing on how do we maintain very, very, very high levels of IT infrastructure uptime, 99.9999 at least. So that will be a slightly different view going forward. The team have already started to think about it, and once we finish the joint outage review, we'll be coming back with a series of what the plan is to get us to a high level of system resilience.
Thank you. We'll make sure that's in the board programme with dates as well going forward. So thank you.
Could I just ask just for the timescales on that then? So you've got the internal review and then you've got the external review. So what sort of timeframes are we looking at here for those to come back, or if you're going to report together?
They will report together. It's I think early January. I think is when we're going.
We'd planned on starting the internal review of how we responded on the 20th. We were having the debrief, so obviously that's now been slightly postponed. So that's been rescheduled for early January. So I'd expect it to happen during January for us to try and aim, sort of by the end, to have it wrapped up.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that report, Tom.
Subo asked my question.
Okay, thank you. We're on form this morning for sure, so that's good. Dates and times. Please, Howard.
Just wanted to acknowledge the progress on the new Falls service. That was really good and exactly the sort of thing we should be doing in terms of trying to reduce the stack. And
absolutely noted, and that forms part of the patient story. So we can reflect on that good work that date. Michael, and then I want to. Paul, do you want to, as you've been so close to the IT, is there anything else you wanted to say? Just this is not a we don't take too much time on the IT.
No, we'll be very
full report.
So I
just the
headline.
headline.
What Siobhan said, that it was very well handled indeed, and I hope we approach it the same way we did the last incident, which was in November 21, when we made a list of 31 things that needed changing, created a shopping list of things we needed to do, of which then we managed to get external funding of 4.7 million to do it, which 2 million was for this replacement of this. So the last time it worked really well, and it went to the Finance and Investment Committee to look at because we know there's improvements we can make in looking ahead, especially with the new Medway data centre. So it'd be good to actually take a wide view of this and have a longer term plan, because we know we can do things now to improve our resilience. And out of the review we did back in November 21, I think we've implemented 85% again of all the actions that were identified then. So it'd be good to take a similar approach and then do the external review, because if they did it now, we know they'd find some things because we know what they are, right? So maybe we should make that, if we approach it the same way, that was what the request was for.
It's good you set the context, and whilst this was an unplanned outage, it was good that we were foreseeing issues in this area, and there was a plan, and the executives had secured significant resources in order to try and mediate this. We were just unlucky with the timing, for sure. Final comment?
Just to very quickly, I slightly disagree with Paul on one point. I think it is really important that the trust has a long-term strategy in this space, building on what Subbu said, and I think it should be informed by some form of external assessment. I think we're broadly get on that, so that's really important. The other thing I'd say, I think it's important that we use governance appropriately. So Siobhan, as accounting officer, needs to present with the annual report and accounts the governance statement. Governance statement should be clear about why this happened and the action that we're taking, so it's very transparent. That's broadly what I'm used to. I don't see it as done as well as it should be across the NHS more widely, but I do think it's an important governance point going forward.
No, noted. And if there was a significant issue, the response was good, and we need to make sure that we're mitigating it certainly in the future. But I think the things we need to pass back through you are thanks to all of the staff engaged in this, particularly the IT staff, but also the operational staff as well, for the way that everybody responded. It was an organisational response, and I think that we must, particularly a difficult time with the difficult time we're having, it was a job well done. Can we move on then to the other items that came out was which Siobhan, again, issues to do with managing the current winter pressures and a partnership working with ICBs, and some very pleasing headlines in Siobhan's report regarding our work with ICB partners. Are there any questions or comments around that particular issue before moves on to industrial action in winter? I think we just note that. And Siobhan, are you getting consistency of interest from all of our ICBs, or does it still vary?
I think there's an acknowledgement that as a regional provider, the ICBs need to somehow find a way of speaking with one voice. That feels better. I think the the sort of coordination piece feels stronger between Sussex and Surrey, I think, because of the transition of lead commissioner role. But I don't think we are being asked for 15 different new ways of doing things across the southeast of England anymore. I think, there is a sense that it needs to be lifted up a level at ICB. At ICB level, and I think actually the introduction of integrated care boards helps an organisation as big as CCAM, because goodness knows how many CCGs it probably was that were interested parties. At least we've got 4 clear leaders to go to for the ICBs now. That does make things easier.
Thank you. For the record, the Kent ICB are revising their governance and will have a regular chairs meeting similar to the one I attend for Surrey and Sussex. So I feel that Kent is also changing the way it works, and I think we've also got that reflected in the report about our coordination with the Kent Coordination Centre. So I think we've got there's a good base being built, I think, for future collaboration. Now we may just do the concluding part of Siobhan's report questions. Just need to conclude with an eye on the time, but these are important matters. The current winter pressures and the steps we're taking, or the executives have taken with our union colleagues to mitigate the impact of industrial action on our services. I think it's important the board just seek some assurance to make sure that we've done all we can, all possible is being done. So first question, Siobhan. Subo.
Thank you, Chair. Siobhan, thank you for that. And I know these are difficult times. I just wanted to ask just 2 quick questions, really. You've agreed the 75% and 50% derogations, you say, but that hasn't been confirmed yet, but they are going to confirm. When will we know that that is confirmed? And then you said that the Army was also going to be called upon. Do we know a quantifiable amount of that help and support, and where we are likely to use it? Have we planned that in advance, where we are likely to need and use it?
Thank you. So we have confirmed 50% and 75%. The logistics of industrial action mean we won't know until the day what people have chosen to do. So the difficulty in planning is the unpredictability of who might take a decision that they haven't declared to either the GMB or to CCAM on the 21st of December. So we're going to have to manage the day, which starts at 0600 hours. We're going to have to manage 0600 to midnight with a degree of unpredictability and with an agile incident management approach to deploy people to where we need to the most throughout that time period. But we have firmly agreed in writing with the GMB the 50% derogation for field operations staff and 75% in EOC and 111. So that's agreed, and as I say, because people can take choices at the very, very last minute in terms of the legalities around industrial action, we won't know until Wednesday. The second question around the military, we've been allocated 100 military personnel, and we're working with the GMB at the moment on the specific numbers that they are predicting, particularly in field ops, the specific numbers of people they are expecting to be on shift and the specific numbers they are expecting to exercise their right to strike. And what that is giving us is a variable picture across all of the operating units. So we are planning with the military personnel and training with the military personnel so that they are prepared and ready to go. In terms of where we put them, it will depend on the concluding numbers that the GMB are providing us over the next 24 to 48 hours. So we are planning, and logistically we will deploy where we need to, but that picture is emerging at the moment.
Thank you. Any final questions on that, Tom?
Sorry, thank you. Siobhan, on the industrial action, so in the same way that after the IT outage, the harm reviews will be business as usual. Are you anticipating that harm reviews for the period of industrial action will be BAU, so-called, or are we going to expedite that process so that we can learn for the next period of action?
It's a really good question, Tom, actually, because of course we haven't spoken about the 28th yet. If the industrial action proceeds on the 28th, I think everybody acknowledges it will be significantly more challenging than the 21st. A, because for CCAM it's a 24-hour strike. B, it starts at the end of 2 bank holidays, which run after the Saturday and Sunday. So 4 days of limited access to normal NHS services always has significant impact on systems in that between Christmas and New Year period. So I think let's take an action away through the sort of incident management and EPRR route to essentially learn fast. I think, Emma, in terms of, you know, strategic commands, military planners, executive leadership, we're going to need to learn fast on whatever happens on the 21st. And our mitigations against patient harm and patient safe and our focus around patient safety will be stress tested in real time. And I think we probably need to make a commitment to the board to come back in the January discussion to make sure that we provide assurance that we changed our approach between the 21st and the 28th if it needs to. Or we got everything as right as we could collectively, and therefore we approach the 28th in the same way. So, but as you can tell, the uncertainty really is around what people say and declare and how they voted, and then what they actually do on the day. And that is the sense nationally of concern about how robust our planning is, but how variable the day can actually be. And people who've got experience of strikes in the ambulance sector have all said that they experienced something different to what was declared. So if that happens again, the plans may need to adjust fast.
I think if I may just sum up on that, so then move on to the next item. Can I first of all just thank you on behalf of the board, the executive team, for dealing with the mess in the way they have, and also in partnership with our trade union colleagues. No one wants this. The trade unions don't want industrial action. They don't want to harm patients, and neither do any of us want to be involved in that. And I think we can take assurance from what we've been advised that every effort has been made to mitigate the impact of industrial action. However, we've been realistic. The risk increases with any withdrawal of staff and with the having to respond a fleet of foot way, but at least you are predicting that. You're actually you're expecting the fact you're going to have to be agile and respond appropriately, and we can't. I don't think we can ask any more just to ensure that across the holiday period we have that resilience. I think all members of the board stand ready to be contacted over the board periods, particularly on harm reviews, if ever this does need to be escalated. Let's hope it doesn't get to that, but if we need to, the contact numbers are in place, people can be contacted. We will escalate that because we don't want to be in that situation, but who knows, the risk is substantial, and we need to make sure we've done all we can to manage that. Can I also thank Janine and Ali and Emma for the clarity of the communications that we've had, that I've seen written around the organisation, explaining the situation that we're in, but also the derogation issue, which is complicated. And that's, I know from talking to you, Siobhan, that was difficult too. That was a time-consuming process with Emma and others to put that in place. So I think that I just want to acknowledge that, make sure that we're all clear about the effort that's gone in. But we are aware there is risk. We've done our best. You've done your best to mitigate it. The board support that, but also recognise there are many things may well be beyond our control, but we've done our best to keep them in our control. So thank you for that. Let's hope this ends soon. Let's move on then to the major item, and again, to guide us in our discussions, to remind colleagues, we have the Board Assurance Framework, the Integrated Quality Report and the Improvement Journey as key source documents for the Board to refer to in your questions and comments regarding the remaining agenda items. So if we move on then to the Board story, we're 10 minutes late, so we need to catch up time. But so the Board story, I think Fiona, Chief Medical Officer, is going to introduce that to the Board.
Thank you, Chair. And this Trust Board story is focusing on keeping patients safe, and an initiative that we've introduced to try and improve the safety of patients who fall at home and are unable to get up. And the board will be very aware of the risks of long delays to this group of patients, particularly with the background of high demand and many instances of really poor examples of quality of service. So this story is around an older faller and the experience that she had. It links in with the paragraphs in the Chief Exec's report around the Falls service.
And unfortunately, once you're on the floor, it's almost impossible to get up. There's nothing you can pull yourself up on that is welded to the floor, virtually. I mean, any chair is going to tip with you or what have you. I'd gone to lock the door, and I think having had the fall a few days before, I probably was a bit wobbly, although I'd taken the trolley up quite close actually to the door. And what made me lean on the back of this small chair, I don't know. That didn't like that and tipped me upside down, or rolled me between the chair and the window. So I lay there, luckily wearing my call button, and press that. So eventually, obviously it got through to this new NHS Fall team.
The initiative is that the community falls trained, specially trained CFRs are dispatched in the usual way by the EOC, go to scene, complete a clinical assessment of the patient, and then treat the patient if necessary, upgrading the call if that's appropriate, or actually getting the patient off the floor using a piece of equipment that we've been given called a razor chair.
Luckily, and very cleverly, somehow with a belt around my waist, I suppose, he managed to pull me up, stand me up, so I was able to go and sit down. And his final words were, "I'm going to ask paramedics to call because of the fact you're on eroxaban, which is a blood thinner."
I think CFRs have been really positive. More importantly, the patients have been really positive as well about the experience they've had being got up off the floor.
Well, I couldn't believe somebody had arrived. I was so used to any of the other falls that I'd had. I've been probably about 3 to 4 hours. I realised that I wasn't high up the list of we need to get there. You know, I wasn't bleeding or doing anything.
We've really taken time to make sure the governance is in place properly, to make sure that there's a clinical safety netting of those patients, and that's where the PP Hub provides that safety net. But at the same time, community first responders wouldn't normally go to C3 calls because once they were effectively in the trust care, they couldn't leave scene until the trust arrived. We've got this interrupted model of care now, which means we can leave people at home with safety netting in place, with clinical supervision, albeit remotely, but nevertheless with clinical supervision. And then the trust can then send a clinical response to the patient when time allows, as opposed to it being essential to get the patient up off the floor.
Well, I think it's fantastic if they can come out to people who've really fallen, but there's no, well, they don't know that at the time, that you're not suffering any other injuries. I mean, you haven't broken anything, but no, I think hopefully you will be saving on paramedics.
Tremendous story. It sort of encapsulates the CCAM improvement journey. It's got everything in there, isn't it? Delays, professional staff using our volunteers, timely response. It's a really nice piece. So must pass our thanks back to all involved in putting that piece together, but also the more importantly, people carrying out that work. It's excellent.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do that. I think it's important to recognise that we've got a significant number of community first responders who've expressed an interest in undertaking this training, so that will be rolled out, as Andrew said, from January.
can I ask the Quality and Patient Safety Committee see a sort of rollout plan, because this is so good. I think going back to improve relations with the integrated care boards, this is a really great example where we can put our mark of what ambulance services can do in the very wider sense, but also keep people away from hospital where it's appropriate. And I think that's got to be good. It's good for patients, but it's also good for our morale as well, isn't it? To make sure we get that right. So thank you. Fiona, you and Robert are going to lead us into the other items.
Thank you. Just to sort of make a point, actually, into...
I think I missed much of the question there. Sorry, Chris, do you want to...
Sorry, Chair. It was just a quick question to Fiona. I think there was a study published last week in Scotland where they've showed a huge increase in falls. Have we taken that into account, particularly of training new responders to the community?
So, I mean, we're rolling this out as quickly as we reasonably can. We've bought the equipment for the next bunch of CFRs who will be trained, as we said, going on from January. But I think when we're seeing periods of high demand, we inevitably see older fallers who always come in as a lower priority call, waiting for longer than we would wish. I'm not aware that we've seen a greater increase in falls at the moment, but it's something we'll keep an eye on.
Thank you.
Just in the same vein, obviously fantastic, but in the same vein, at a recent visit, we came across something called Star 6, which seemed to me to be an excellent concept, whereby, for those who don't know, there's a pre-agreed arrangement between us and a care home, whereby if there is a fall or incident at the care home, that they phone us direct and can potentially avoid a dispatch during that process. It relies, however, on there being this pre-agreed arrangement, and presumably the number is Star 6 or whatever. It seemed like a brilliant idea, but I wasn't sure what the process is in terms of rolling it out. So the guys we spoke to were very positive about it, but I'd be very keen to see, in the same vein, that thing rolled out across the patch.
This is a local initiative. This is the visit to Thanet, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is an arrangement in Thanet, but we are working closely with the ICBs. And I think Sussex is a really good example of this, because up until very recently, there were about 6 different numbers that we could contact to gain either clinical advice or to instigate a referral pathway. But as of, I think it was earlier this week, we've got a single point of contact for Sussex, and it's something that we would encourage across the entire patch. I don't know whether Emma wants to come in on that.
I think you've nailed it. I've got nothing else to say except the feedback from the CFRs is they're really excited about this. What we're doing is rolling out the training to the existing, but everyone new joining us from April will get the falls training as part of the core component of the course. So it will become more an exception that people aren't trained rather than an exception that they are.
Michael, is your final question?
Yeah, it's just building on that implementation. I think it's brilliant, and tremendous thanks to Andrew. I just wondered though, we need to be careful about this in terms of managing expectations and demand. So I wondered, Fiona, do you know that given the number of CFRs that we've got, assuming that they are all trained, would that enable us to give a fairly uniform service in terms of falls across the whole of the CCAM patch? Because that's what our customers, patients will be looking for.
So I think in terms of existing CFRs, it's about a third that have signed up for this, okay. And I'll check with Emma. Yeah, about a third have signed up to undertake this training. But going forward, every new CFR, it will be part of the routine training. So that will increase the coverage. But our CFR coverage is patchy. People sign up to be a member of their local team. So it's also, I think, being supplemented by an additional initiative that we're undertaking at the moment, both in an area which is particularly difficult to reach in Kent, the area near Romney, and also in the patch which is north of Chichester, okay. Which again is poorly covered, where we will be, we're currently training a group of emergency responders, which is an enhanced CFR, we've got a cadre of those in training, undertaking emergency driving training at the moment. And they will cover areas which we currently find very difficult to reach within the ARP standards.
I think this is really good. Chair, I would only say from a governance perspective, I think we need to return to this, because it's great to launch something, but you need to actually see it through, and there needs to be transparency that, you know, that we are, as best as we can, serving everybody in the CCAM footprint.
Just one thing to note, Commissioners are really supportive of this. This is actually one of our sequins for this year, and my expectation would be that actually moving forward it may well become a 2-year piece potentially, because it's such an important area. So just for some additional governance, it's going through the sequin framework as well this year.
Okay, and I think that's helpful to know. If it's a 2-year programme, there should be milestones where the board is given an update about progress.
Given it's such a positive story, let's make sure we get the best out of it. So I think it needs a clear rollout plan. The Quality Patient Safety Committee can oversee that. But I think, you know, it's important what Fiona said, that the CFR coverage is not universal across the CCAM patch, and I think we need to again manage expectations and work closely with the ICB. But it really is a positive development. Can I move us on, please, because time is of the essence. The BAF risks improvement journey, IQR.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, I will talk about the actions from the last board in regards to the welfare calls, and then sort of move on to the IQR next, if that's okay. So if you pay attention to page 4 of the cover sheet, you will note some data on our responsiveness around welfare calls, and you would note that we were not fulfilling the obligations that we set out over the course of that month. So welfare calls really can't be looked in isolation. So we've got BAF 14, which talks about the current operating model that we have. Then we got BAF 2, 5, 5, and 13 that actually talks about the issues we have around the workforce. There are sort of actions, and Chief Exec has outlined those in terms of the responsive escalation action plan, the REAP 4, and we've recently ratified a surge management plan and a clinical safety plan that includes a set of triggers and actions and unexpected outcome. So welfare calls are done, and they're undertaken by emergency medical advisors under the guidance of our clinical safety navigators. And there's three trigger points. One is around the breach APR, which we are constantly breaching. The other is around where a clinician breached the contact time, and lastly, where a clinician identified that the patient needs to have a welfare call. So the latter, which is the where a clinical decision is made to have a patient access to have patients reviewed via welfare call, is the options that the organisation is looking at. So if you look at ambulance trusts across the country, we are outlier in terms of providing this particular service. And I think the best model is to concentrate on what I've suggested in terms of having a clinician look at the stack and also advise and direct welfare calls. And lastly, Chair, from the Quality Summit that we had, and remember we had a number of actions that's coming out of there. We have our first Quality Summit that's going to start off in January around how we keep people safe in the stack.
Fiona, anything else wants to add to that?
In terms of the risks that you'll in the report, you'll see that at the time this report was written, there were 4 extreme risks relating to the medical directorate. 3 of those relate to medicines management, and 2 of those have currently been downgraded. But we are working very closely with finance and with the states to look at advancing a business case for the relocation of the Medicines Distribution Centre, and that is sort of stage 1 in the medicines transformation case. So that is progressing. One of the other risks that we've closed, and because it is now an issue, is being dealt with by the senior management group, and that is around the drug-seeking behaviour within 111, or the population that that phones 111, and that's an issue that we need to progress.
Thank you. Board colleagues, questions? 2 important items there with concerns to the board: welfare calls and medicines management. Elizabeth.
Thanks. Rob, can I ask, in terms of clinical callbacks, and you've mentioned resource, the plan and the time frame for resolving that issue and getting appropriate callback response times in place, please?
So we are currently having conversations with the Northwest Ambulance Trust, who has actually done this. So they have stop their welfare calls, and we're just sort of having conversations in terms of how we can learn lessons from them and implement that as soon as possible. So I would think, just looking to Emma, that it will be a short time frame where we actually resolve this.
So yes, and I had a meeting with my team and Margaret and Richard this morning, and with welfare calls on the table. I think the key thing is we're trying to do welfare calls for everyone, and I think the numbers they mentioned was something like 36,000 that we would have had to do in October. Actually, this has to be a risk stratified position, so that's the piece they're working up at the moment. And obviously, with the urgency in terms of the performance that we're seeing at the moment, it's really coming to light. So I think John said he was talking to Northwest next week. And we'll hopefully be coming back pretty rapidly in the next few weeks with a proposal and some timelines.
Thanks.
Okay, that's good. It's clearly an urgent issue, and it's been treated with appropriate urgency. So thank you for that.
Right. If I then move on to the.
How was the question? Come back, Howard.
I've got a few questions on the IQR. Are you going to come on to that?
Yes. So thanks, Jay. Just moving on to the IQR. So I'll start off by highlighting 3 key areas for the board to note on page 11, which is incident 17, safeguarding, and 18, patient experience, which includes duty of candor. And then I'll hand over to Fiona in regards to addressing the other parts of the IQR, medicines management and cardiac survival. So just to begin with, we've had a month-on-month positive progress against our SIs and our SIs backlog, as I indicated on page 11 of the IQR. So as of the 8th of December, we've had a total of 9 outstanding cases. All cases have investigators, and we're working to resolve those by the end of December. So in total, we have 43 open SIs. So just moving on to open actions. Again, really good, steady progress made over the last few months. We have a trajectory to close all by the end of December. We're on track with that trajectory. So we've got a total of 9 cases so far of open SI actions to resolve. They are all within 2020. Moving on to DATEX. So DATEX, just to note that we've had to date from April to the end of November 15,714 incidents reported onto DATEX. So just wanted to set that context. So we have 820 of incidents are within the 45 reporting days that the organization sets for in investigations. And to date, we've got 377 DATEXs that are outside of those 45-day period. We know the areas which have the highest numbers, and that is our 111 and our EOCs, and we are injecting some bespoke support within those units to help to bring those numbers back. I think it's really important to note as well, really important point, is that all incidences that comes in under DATEX are reviewed within a 48-hour period by the DATEX team, and any sort of moderate and above harm are then escalated to the SI manager that gets on to the SI group that meets weekly. And just to note as well that we are conducting audits of about 30 cases of how the incidents are managed through that process to the SI group, as I said. The two more points, safeguarding level 3 training, it's cited in the QPSC escalation report. Better improvement to date, we are at about 74.77%, so we're on target to meet the expected percentage at the end of March. That's notwithstanding that, if we've got any issues in terms of, in our inability to pull staff off into training. Patient experience, we've had a backlog that built up between September and October. We had about 67 of those cases overdue, and half of those we've responded to in terms of closing those, and we are on track to complete that by the end of December. And then lastly, duty of candor. Again, due to capacity issues, we weren't able to fulfill our obligations to respond within a 10-day period, but we have done that with the exception of one case where we were not able to finalize the next of kin. I'll just pass over to Fiona.
Thank you very much. So I will talk about cardiac survival and STEMI performance. You'll note that there's the common cause variation for cardiac survival, both for all patients and for the Utstein group of patients. Quite honestly, reporting this on a monthly basis is a bit meaningless because this is the pattern that we see all the time. However, we have just seen the final draft of the annual cardiac arrest survival report, and that is really positive and will come to the board. It's been through the Quality Governance Committee. It will have a couple of very minor tweaks. Tom has seen it already, and it's a really good news story, which is very pleasing given the increase in response times that we've seen to this group of patients. You'll see that the STEMI care bundle has pleasingly shown an increase. This is because we've finally been allowed to use an additional analgesic and have that scored. We've been using it for ages, but we weren't allowed to count it. However, this again is a meaningless, or a rather meaningless bundle, and we are campaigning nationally to have this adjusted, because what it does is to increase the on-scene time, particularly when a non-registrant attends these patients and waits for paramedic backup. And the most important thing to do for these patients is to get them to a centre where they can have the offending artery dilated. So we are hoping that these criteria will be revised, and that will focus on on-scene time and reducing the time to angiography. In terms of stroke, the stroke bundle again has been consistently between 96 and 98%, and I think that needs to be replaced. We have worked very closely with stroke centres in Kent to introduce telemedicine, and that is now going to be rolled out across the patch. And I think we need to develop an indicator which reflects that. In terms of medicines management, we continue to see a pretty constant level of incident reporting, but a very low level of harm being reported as a result of that. The number of signal signatories has increased, but that's because we've changed the way in which we report them. So we now report all single signatories rather than ones which we feel were not justified, and are working with the OUs and individuals to reduce that. And in terms of the audits undertaken by OTLs, we've got a very large number of new OTLs, and the last lot of training was undertaken in 2018, and we've now reached an agreement with colleagues in operations around a training package for those OTLs, which is really pleasing. That's all I was going to say. Thank you.
My colleagues, questions, comments, full report there. We're ahead of challenges, particularly in EOC regarding welfare calls and callbacks, some backlog in terms of complaint handling, but also some positive stories regarding improvements in spite of challenges to response times, improvements of direct care to patients with heart conditions. So that is good to hear. So questions, Howard?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the IQR then, using it for the purposes it was intended. There are two failures, one of which you mentioned, single witness signature. I'm okay with that, thank you. The other one that came out is this issue of CD breakages. I'm not particularly familiar with it, and I noticed the target is 0. And I just wondered if you could comment on that, because it comes out as a fail under the SPC chart. And then, secondly, the medicines management percent audited completed is showing in SPC terms a trend of concern. So perhaps you could comment on that as well, please.
Certainly. In terms of CD breakages, it's probably a bit unrealistic to say we won't ever break a CD. What happens... Sorry, yes. So we have a small number of control drugs. A band 5 and 6 paramedic carry both morphine and diazepam. Our CCPs carry additional control drugs, but the drugs that commonly break are morphine and diazepam, because those are the ones that are withdrawn in the largest numbers. And this is generally because slightly clumsy fingers don't always hold an ampoule when they're withdrawing it from the Omnicell or from the box and transferring it into the little pouch that they carry on their belt. And despite putting mats on the floors, the ampoules don't always bounce. So all these are witnessed withdrawals, and certainly in the Omnicell sites we have fingerprint recognition, so we know exactly who has withdrawn the drug. And what we're looking at now is whether there are trends to certain OUs having particularly high breakage rates, and whether there are any individuals that have high breakage rates.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it may need to review the target of 0. I understand that, but otherwise
it's an aspirational target.
Yes, it's always going to come out as a fail, and it might be more useful in terms of spotting that trend if there was a number and then the standard deviations around it, as for the other SPCs, might be helpful. Thank you.
And the other issue that you raised was around
the percentage of audits completed, medicines management audits.
Yes.
Trend of concern.
That's because we have closed a number of stations and haven't reflected that in the reporting, but more importantly, that OTLs are a pressurised group of staff who are expected to do a huge number of things, particularly at times of high demand when they spend a lot of their shift at hospitals supervising hospital handover delays. There's also the issue about training, and we've now agreed a package for the training of those OTLs who had not previously had their training. I think that will see an improvement in this particular metric.
Thank you. Thanks.
Tom?
Thanks, Rita. Just following on the medicines issue you've just raised, can we receive assurance that those who are out there, like the OTLs who are dealing with this, are being asked about what they think the solutions are? And secondly, are we prioritising our quality improvement activity to things where the risk is as high and and ongoing as these sort of things? So there's two questions there. And before you answer those, just to declare an interest, because I chair the National Ambulance Guidelines for Heart Attack and Stroke, and I'll come back on STEMI in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona?
So coming to the number of CD breakages, they are about 18 a month. We have 10 Omnicell sites, and about the same number of non-Omnicell sites. So actually it's a very small number per station. So yeah, it would be a great idea to see if staff can come up with some other ideas. But I think that actually it's a relatively low number.
There's a materiality point, yeah, for sure. Thank you.
And sorry, Tom, I didn't get the other question.
No, it was really a broader point then about prioritising our QI focus.
I'll leave that to Rob.
Yes, thanks, Tom. Yeah, QI will include a triangulation of, various quality indicators that will steer us actually to where we need to go to in terms of our quality improvement. So, we've took this approach to the Quality Summit. So we've looked at all the risks that were discussed. We've looked at the recommendations, and we then determined the best efforts is around, how do we keep people safe, and as I said, that QI project will start in January. But just again, in terms of harm reviews, we've got two principles of harm reviews, isn't there? We got the new methodology that's presented to the QPSC, which is a structured approach where we proactively actually do reviews before incidents happen. So I think that will start off really soon, because we've just completed the PDSA on adrenaline case, and then the other one is, as we discussed, an unusual event happened, and we do a review.
Thank you. Other questions, David?
Thank you. There was two key points for me. The one is, for the first time, we're seeing specifically narrowly a picture on cardiac and then stroke, and I think this just prompts me in the context. We talked about the fallers earlier, but I think there's a piece for us to take away, Chair, and I think with a bit of work in QPSC around some of these patient journeys. What's the faller experience? So how would we look at this, and how quickly we get to fallers, and then what response we give them in the context of some we've seen in the board story. So I think it just prompts me, we've got cardiac and stroke patients, but we have other big cohorts of patients that we should be looking into that lens as well, because then we can understand what's the experience for those specific types of patients. So I think it's one that I'd like to suggest QPSC takes away in terms of identifying what those right groups are, and then we can build it into the IQR going forward, because it allows us to look at it from a patient perspective rather than just from a aggregated point, which we know doesn't give us all the information necessarily.
Well, thank you for that, David. I think it's particularly important, particularly when there's evidence-based pathways that we are aware of that we're unable to follow because of operational pressure. So I think that's an important piece. So thank you. We'll take an action on that. On the second point,
and the second point, just to refer, for the first time as well, we're seeing harm played through in the IQR. So we've seen incidents, but then what does this mean for harm in patients? So just to draw on slide 12 to the board, where we've seen the trend, it's something that we've known about and the board has seen before, but the relationship between our response times and our harm is very apparent. So this just helps the board see we have a high concerning trend in the increase of harm versus where a baseline level of harm would be if we were able to get the patients on time. So I think we need to take that into context of this is the impact then on patients as a result of the challenges that we will see then through workforce and operations, etc.
Tom, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, thanks. And just to respond back to that, because of course the major harm from delay is around those so-called time-critical conditions, which are cardiac arrest, which are heart attack, and which are stroke. So there's something about maintaining the focus on those, but also then prioritising from every other patient complaint condition that the trust engages with. For me, we're seeing national reports that the delay in heart attack is getting longer. This is C2, and that is really putting people at heart. The numbers may be relatively small. It's still thousands a year, but that's a key modifier of the outcome for these patients. And I think renewed focus through QI as a priority is going to be really important for us.
Fiona, you want to comment?
I think Tom's absolutely right. I would point to the work that's been done on C2 segmentation, where the C2 bucket, and of course that's over 1,000 calls a day for us, will be divided into 2A, B and C. That's currently being trialled or is about to be trialled in West Midlands and London. I think they may have put it on hold for a bit, but certainly that would allow us to highlight those immediately life-threatened patients. But I would also say that one of the roles of the clinical safety navigator and the clinical supervisors, EOC, is to keep a very close eye on the C2 stack to pull out those patients. The problems that we have are when the C2 stack gets really big, because it can be very difficult to pull out those needles in that particular haystack.
But just to pull some of that back together, we heard from the Chief Executive before around improved relations with the ICBs, and I think it's fair to say we are making our own efforts to improve response times, but there's also issues to do with the volume of calls, and calls that perhaps an ambulance is deployed to that another resource would be appropriate. So I think what we're getting now is some rich information here, I think, where we've got the architecture in place that these things can now be discussed in an appropriate way and deliver the integration that's the holy grail. We're also
Thank you, Chair. Not actually on that point, but just reflecting on Rob drawing out one of the key issues around patient experience in the IQR. I just wonder whether, as an exec team, we should take an action to have a look at the complaints process and to be able to do a bit of a deep dive at exec level before we come back to the board. I was just looking at the actions we're taking, and I know we've got an alternative duties member of staff to assist with the EOC complaints, but the special cause variation in the IQR is quite significant between July and now in terms of our ability to respond to complaints in a timely manner. I say that having signed off 3 complaints yesterday, which were very, very complex, which had a lot of learning in them, but one of them in particular dated back, because it was complex, back to May, and I just worry that if we don't understand what drives the backlog, because the IQR also tells us we're not receiving an additional quantum of complaints, so something process wise, and maybe Joe Turner and others can help with a bit of process mapping, but I would suggest it might be good if we report back to the board after we've done an executive level deep dive to provide additional assurance about the insights we gather around why our complaints response is not where we would want it to be.
Thank you, Josh. Would be very welcome.
No, so thank you, Siobhan. That's really timely. And so our BI team did a review, a deep dive in terms of our incidents to just get a better analysis in terms of what we're seeing, why we're seeing it, and what else we can do. Can I suggest that actually we have an integrated report going to QPSC in January, and perhaps we can do some work to ensure that what you're suggesting is included into that report.
Thank you. We'll make sure that happens, and the Quality Based Security will overview that. Chris, you had a question?
It's just a quick question, more of a comment actually from Fiona about medicine management. I mean, only just I think 6 weeks ago that the London Ambulance got an HSK award for managed management. Do we have any learning from that, or are you aware if other people are doing something that's different from what we're currently doing?
I believe their award was in relation to the Medicines Distribution Centre that they set up in South East London. Our chief pharmacist has visited that centre, and we've had discussions as to whether we could work in conjunction with them. I think they are aware that they are pretty much already at capacity with that unit, and wondered whether we would be able to assist them. Essentially, they use a very different system of distributing their drugs to what we use. But their new centre is certainly state-of-the-art, and Carol Ann, our chief pharmacist, has been to see it, and will work with their chief pharmacist around areas that we could use that would be of benefit when we manage to find a new centre.
Thank you. Can I Michael, then wish to keep us moving? Michael?
Just a very quick question. It goes back to C2. Fiona, you and I had a discussion, and you explained to me that what seems to be happening in the wider health population is because of COVID and other things. People aren't necessarily in their everyday life doing, having the health checks and things like that might indicate that they were at risk of stroke or heart condition like that. What I'm interested in, you're saying there's an increasing the volume of C2 calls. I see, if you look at the other charts in here, our performance nationally in terms of our response times seems to be not, we're doing better than most. I just wonder, what does that mean in terms of lives saved? Can we actually track from this data in terms of our response to C2? You've identified it as a risk that you're looking at in the clinical stack. Are we successful relatively in getting to people early enough in terms of the clinical care to ensure that they do survive or that they don't result in life impairment?
It's a very good question. I think it's more difficult to answer for the C2 patients because although they are immediately life-threatened, if they get the right treatment, they will survive. And it's very difficult to know because we are not able to get detailed outcome measures from the hospitals. What we do know is our time to get the patient to definitive care. In terms of lives saved, that is more around cardiac arrest survival. And we have increased the number of lives saved in the last year, despite the increasing response times, which is pleasing. However, if you look critically at our time from call to needle for the STEMI patients, that is prolonged, but equally we've done better than other ambulance services, but that doesn't make it right. Equally, our stroke times are constrained by the delays in getting to those patients. The on-scene times for stroke are within the national norm. They're around about 30 minutes. We could do a lot more to improve the on-scene times for STEMI patients, for the heart attack patients. And that is something that our clinical audit department are working on so they can give data both at OU level and at individual level. And I think that will improve performance.
And are you confident, my final question, in terms of the triaging that's going around C2? You mentioned a very sophisticated system. We've got the resources to do that, or are we stretched in that space?
We are currently stretched in terms of EMA call handling, and our response times to incoming calls has diminished or has decreased significantly since October. We are working closely with the recruitment team and the training team in the EOC, and we have seen an increased number of EMAs, but at times of very high demand, we do struggle to get anywhere near the current ARP targets.
Okay, thank you.
Can I move us on? I think in terms of if you finish the BAF risk section, thank you. Can we have the learning from death report, so Fiona?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief and take the paper as read. Essentially, there's very little different in this report to the previous reports that I've presented. This is the report for Q4 for 2021-22. The items that we're taking forward is that we currently have a workaround where we provide a response to patients who are clearly dead. We feel that in conjunction with the police, and we're working very closely with the police and other ambulance services who have an existing procedure for dealing with this group of patients, that we should not necessarily be responding to them as we currently are. We also did a deep dive into traumatic cardiac arrests in this quarter, just because honestly this procedure, the learning from death policy, leads us to do the same thing quarter in, quarter out. So we look for specific groups of patients to see if our care has been good. And the care provided to the 25 traumatic cardiac arrests in that quarter, clearly a small number, showed that those patients got the best possible care. Sadly, they did not survive, but they all got an enhanced care response, either from a CCP or from our colleagues at AAKSS. And finally, we're doing some work around the consistency that we report when we decide whether care is poor or very poor, because what to me might be poor might be very poor to one of my colleagues. So for the next report, we will see some standards introduced. They've got very little scientific background other than based on the ARP targets, so that we all, when we are reporting for learning from deaths, at least have a consistent basis.
Right, but from your analysis as Chief Medical Officer, what we're hearing though is that whilst yes, we have to deal with death, and there's nothing that's appearing out of these reports that would give us undue cause for concern in terms of any variation at all in death rate in the community.
There's been no change over the past 18 months when we've been doing these reports. However, those cases where we felt the care was either poor or very poor related to delays in attending those patients, but the clinicians who reviewed those reports did not feel that any of those patients were likely to have survived.
Right, thank you. doesn't remove the distress from the family, but at least there's some comfort from the point of view they've had the most appropriate care we can provide in spite of delays. Thank you for that. Quality and Patient Safety Committee report.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the paper as read.
Sorry,
question to Howard first.
Able there, my airline and my peripheral vision's not as good today. So
thank you, Chair. Just one question on the learning from death report. I note the extensive experience of the people on the panel that review these, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think there's anybody outside of the trust that sits on that panel. And so I'm sort of a little bit concerned about the independence of it. I wonder if someone could comment on that for me, or whether I'm wrong. Thanks.
Is there some audit, external audits of these processes?
So I think currently we don't have any peer review of the reports, and I think that's actually a very positive suggestion. We have linked in with colleagues from South Central Ambulance Service and received copies of their reports, but that was basically to look at whether our report fulfilled what we felt that it should compared to theirs. I think that is a positive suggestion, Howard, and I'll bring that up with Richard, who currently orchestrates the reports. What I would say is that of the 6 reviewers, we are divided into 3 teams. So we each individually review the reports and then check with a colleague. So we have an internal peer review, but currently no external peer review.
A good challenge. And can I ask the Quality and Patient Safety Committee to take that as an action and work with Fiona in terms of to ensure that we've got some governance around some peer review of that report.
Thank you, Chair. And I can also confirm that at the last QPS, we did actually discuss this. It's not in the escalation report, but it's come up now. So Richard will be talking to Fiona about how we try and achieve that sort of independent check on our work, so we're not just checking our own homework, I think is the
Thank you. Thank you. Keep us moving. Any final questions? I'll move on then to the Quality and Patient Safety Committee report.
Thank you very much. So take the paper as read. The first thing really was on quality improvement. We've got a new deputy director who we're meeting this afternoon, who just gave us a short introduction to her work. I'll just focus on the deep dive we did on harm reviews, and particularly around quality control, actually, because one of the things that I've certainly been asking for a while, and other colleagues around the trust, is about this issue of the perception of marking our own homework. So how are we ensuring that the work we're doing in reviewing cases is properly audited, properly quality assured? We had a discussion around keeping patients safe, and particularly hearing from the outcomes of the quality summits, which was very, very useful, and highlighting what's down here as risk 3, but this thing about our patients waiting in the queue for us to hear what's wrong with them or to get them help. This discussion about trying to fix things immediately versus our long-term strategic approach reflected in the BAF, in that particular risk 14 on the operating model, was something that we went into, but we also recognised, and Siobhan has talked about this earlier, we're not operating in a vacuum as an organisation. It was this thing about how we're working with our system partners to address demand, but also the pathways for patients subsequently. But this issue about keeping patients safe and whether we're designed to do our best for patients remains an important risk for us, which is why we're escalating it, just to reinforce the point. Thank you.
In relation to the operating model?
Yes.
Yeah. Concluded your report?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so questions or comments about the QPS report? Siobhan?
I think just building on your point, Tom, in terms of the escalation, I think one of the things we probably need to do early in 2023 is think is the organisation set up to work in partnership? So structurally, who and how are we expecting to work in partnership with the multiple stakeholders that we've got? And I think I was talking to some other ambulance trust chief execs a couple of weeks ago, and in all parts of the country there are now sort of director of partnership type roles that have a specific relationship management and liaison portfolio with ICBs. And I think because of the size and the regional coverage, it will probably be a consideration for us to take early in 2023 to make sure we've got the leadership capacity and capability to work in partnership. I think there is a real strong will from our ICB partners to have CCAM around the table, but at the minute all roads lead to the same people who are trying to run the business, run the operating units, be at the ED departments, join Emma's senior leadership team, etc., etc. So I think structurally we might want to pay some consideration to that to enable us, as you've escalated here, to find the strategic solutions to the long-standing issues. We have to be round the table. The Sussex example is a good one where the single point of access should make a massive difference to divert what would be category 3 calls in particular straight out of the stack and quickly to a referral point for urgent community response, and then to close it down and for the crews or the call handlers to be able to move on. So I do think we're going to need to think about that structurally next calendar year.
Thank you. That's very welcome. And I've asked that obviously you work at the Workforce Committee about any sort of restructuring, as it were, and I think that would be welcome. But also I think like the point you've on is let's try and encourage our colleagues in the ICBs. Let's get an agreed list of things we're going to work on in priority order, because there's an attempt we can be boiling the ocean here and spend a lot of time. Let's get down to really key risk-based approach will have a big impact on patient care, particularly where we can join up the services. So at least let's try and encourage them to do that. So can we, just in terms of bringing together this important section on keeping patients safe, are there any other questions the board wished to pose or ask before I sum up?
Chair, I just want to say I really support that recommendation that Siobhan makes about having partner. You know, in other organisations, it's so key now, and you're quite right. We should have seen it earlier. You know, and I think that's been a problem, you know, in terms of our interaction, particularly when you look at the patient pathway, isn't it, that you can begin to see where the interventions are lacking and how do we move it forward. So I think that would really make a fundamental difference if we get it right.
Thank you. But we've had a comprehensive report here about how in this overall section around keeping patients safe, starting with the board story. We've heard from Rob regarding the BAF risks. Clearly there are still some issues of concern remain, particularly the volume of calls into AOC and the issues regarding welfare call, and that's something where we're encouraged to hear that attempts being made to try a different approach to welfare calls. So thank you for that, and we look forward to progress of that through the Quality and Patient Safety Committee and back to the board, because it does feel a really fundamental issue around patient safety in managing those that volume of calls. Pleasing improvements in terms of safeguarding and dealing with the backlog, but again encourage continued efforts in that area, and I'm pleased also you brought out the concerns around patient experience and dealing in a timely way with patient complaints, and the Chief Executive has made a really good suggestion regarding the Executive doing further work in that area, because let's deal with the ones where we need to apologise or can give a quick answer to. Let's try and get them done in days. The others, as you've rightly said, Siobhan, some take months, and rightly so, and they need that appropriate investigation. And we also had a report we get from the Quality Patient Safety Committee, and we also know some pleasing improvements in terms of our STEMI and cardiac response. In spite of delayed response times at times, we're still managing to maintain quality of care to our patients in those areas and get evidence via the learning from deaths reports. So that brings together, say, a very important part of the board's business. We have overrun, but I think if we're going to overrun anything, is how happy we're overrunning on patient safety. So that's a really important matter. Can I respectfully suggest we take a very quick 5-minute break, 5 minutes only. I'll give you 7 minutes, back at 12:05, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the business. Okay, thank you. We are behind time, so we need to catch up. Right, we're moving on now to item 7122, which is the improving culture section of the agenda, and Ali, Director of HR, is going to lead us into this. So, Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the papers as read and just highlight a few key points, I think, then. So, obviously, oh, hang on, my computer's gone a bit funny here. 1 second. Yes. So obviously in terms of the key risks, this has been flagged a number of times already, but the sustained volume of operational pressure we're taking, I think, actually is continuing to have an impact in terms of planned staff turnover and sickness that we were expecting at this point. So I want to pick up the action point on the sickness levels from a previous board meeting. So we are clear, and we have done the work to establish what the major drivers are of, medically of sickness absence. And for the record, these are respiratory issues, anxiety, stress and depression, gastro and musculoskeletal, which make up 80% plus of all of our sickness. And we've reviewed these initially at EMB. You can see, if you follow the longer term sickness trend in the IQR, you can see that it is down. It's now down to just over 8.5% compared to our 7% planned level at this point. But it's not, obviously not quite where we planned for it to be. There's currently a joint piece of work between Ops and HR to look in more granular detail at the reasons underlying the trends in more detail, and that's due to report back in January and considered at the leadership team meeting, which is the joint executive team and senior management group. But I think it's fair to say that there are also broader issues which are driving the position as well. And these include the fact that as a trust, we don't have the establishment that we've assessed ourselves to meet the demands that we need as a trust. And even if you look at the issues that we've reported on earlier in terms of the number of call handlers we have for the sheer volume of calls that we're currently taking or holding, the response times to take calls and respond in terms of dispatch against ARP targets, and also the fact that we cannot with absolute certainty yet, we're working on this very hard, provide all of our field op staff with a guaranteed break and overruns consistently running at approximately 1 in 2 of all shifts. So when you look at the IQR, so there are real pressures, I think, actually. And I think to sort of be at the point where we are, not ideal in terms of sickness levels, but actually, given the pressures on both in terms of the size of the workforce that we have to deal with, the volume of work we have, plus the actual indicators we have in terms of the types of stresses that are being placed on people, I think it's actually probably a reasonable position. Saying that never accepting that there's not more we can do. And of course, it's fair to say that we are still seeing post-COVID effects and the effect of burnout and other issues. So our health and well-being offers that we're doing and offering to our staff are more important than ever. So there's a complex set of systems, I think, actually, and they're also manifested by poor employee experience and morale, as we've seen by recent staff surveys. So similar to other ambulance services, but not something we can accept, obviously. And what we'll need to do, I think, is continue the good work that we've started in terms of the root causes of some of these things, and we need to provide focus and attention to make sure that balance between the focus on providing patient response and focus on staff is a balanced one, which doesn't, in the end, continue the current level of pressure on staff. So we'll need to have that conversation, I think, as a board exec team around where the needle sits between the two. So that's a key issue for us. And more positively, the rota redesign process and the focus on providing healthy breaks and avoiding late overruns, as well as implementing recommendations from the dispatch review, which we've got currently, will all need to form part of a more comprehensive solution to health and welfare. So just moving on, highlighting a few other points. We previously had combined a risk around retention and culture, so I've split those this time, and you'll see in the recommendations that I'm asking for the board's agreement on the new risk of culture and leadership. So I've put culture and leadership together, so we know that we're signing up for the culture and leadership program when we've started that. And the reason I've done it in this way is because the number one determinant of culture in an organisation is the leadership practice. So that's why that's put together like that. So we'll be interested in views and discussion on that when we have that. We've talked at length around confirmed industrial action by the GMB. Although it's not on the BAF, it's one of the highest scores. I've changed the risks on the corporate risk register, so that score is now 20 because there is a definite, there is confirmed industrial action. So that score has been changed to reflect that. Excuse me. So moving on, so in terms of recruitment, we've continued to show good progress, I think, in terms of vacancy rate and time to hire. We've identified a bottleneck which we're sorting out, so that shouldn't be an issue shortly. And I wanted to, obviously, it's always good to report on successes as well, I think, at the board. So our international recruitment work has been really good. And, in particular, I'd like to commend a member of my team, Shannon, who's really been a key driver for that. Actually, there's lots of people been working on it, but in particular, she's been seen as an influential person in terms of the work that we've done. So we've done really, really well compared to other ambulance trusts, and absolutely as well. And as a result, we have put a business case together, which is currently in the process of recruiting a further 100 staff, so 70 experienced paramedics and 30 NQPs. And that experience word is really important. So in total, we'll have recruited through the international recruitment exercise around 105 international paramedics once these two programs have been completed. Just moving on then onto retention. So we've discussed and agreed a plan to improve staff retention at EMB and SMG, Senior Management Group, for the record. I've set out in the cover paper what the key parts of that are. And also, I just wanted to flag, the IQR shows we continue to make reasonable progress, I think it's fair to say, with appraisals and that training. There is an error in the report, by the way, which I've just spotted this morning and last night, which is that it quotes the end-of-year appraisal target incorrectly, so it should be 85. So we just need to correct that, so my apologies for that. I'm not quite sure how that happened. And there are also some issues, I think. Actually, there was a recent internal audit report which actually showed some areas of good practice with statutory manager training, but also showed a fair number of areas of work to do still. So we're happy to accept all of those. We have no management response, and there'll be more focused effort on that. Finally, I wanted to touch on culture and leadership. So I was pleased to report that we've appointed a new programme director for culture. Really pleased with the appointment, so we'll be able to give more details shortly, but I think it will also be very helpful. By background, she's a paramedic and had lots of experience in learning and education and QI as well, so we're going to get a really good member of the team, I think, actually coming to us. So hopefully being able to start fairly shortly. I know it's a topic of interest always to the board in terms of the continuing work around the Until It Stops work and the behaviour work as well. So I'm pleased to report that we're continuing to reduce handling time for cases. So you can see that from the graphs. And I can report as at this morning, we are still on 18% of all of our cases are relating to bullying, harassment and sexual misconduct. Obviously, we don't want any, but it's good to see that actually the number of cases which are related to sexual misconduct alone have now dropped. We've only got 6 live cases there, so that's actually good. And we are very prompt in terms of picking things up and actually dealing with those. I think actually much more as we provide more focus to that over time. We've got just over around 100 managers left to attend our sexual safety workshops, and the process then will be to roll that training out in a modified form for all members of staff within the trust, so that we've covered the most important group in terms of taking leadership on this. It's management responsibility and leadership responsibility to make sure that people own that. So that's really important. So it's good to see we've nearly covered all of our managers now with that, and we'll be rolling that out to all staff, as I say. A couple of other points. I met with the senior advisor from ACAS yesterday to get an update as to how that work was going. He's now met with all of our recognised trade unions, and will be meeting with a number of trust representatives as well to actually get a fuller trust account of how the relationship is currently. So in January we'll be starting on to the next phase of work with ACAS in terms of mediation with our unions. I've nothing to add to what I've set out in terms of the paperwork here on the review of the HR and OT function, other than we took the report fully at exec board in last month, and we accepted all of the recommendations inside of Grant's report, which was very helpful. There was a serious number of recommendations in there, and we've accepted all of those, and we've got a full action plan which we've developed with timescales. The immediate action we put in place is for another HR director who's been working with my team to look at our most complex employee relations cases. That work is now completed as of last Friday, and we have a plan in respect of all of the most complex cases, so that's really good, and it's actually provided a new level of confidence in the team as well, I think, actually, in terms of being able to feel a little bit more confident about what they're doing, because obviously when you're dealing with a very large number of complex employee relations issues, it can have quite a drain on the people handling those cases regularly as well. So that's been good. And the very final comment here is it was good to see and reassuring that actually we've continued to get a 60% plus response rate to our staff survey. So we finished on about 62%, and we'll get the detailed results in the next quarter. There's a couple of recommendations at the end. I want to pick up those later on. So.
Thank you. There's clearly a lot going on there. I mean, just in headlines, it's really positive to hear about some improvements in process recruitment, some of the international recruitment work that you've done, that your colleagues are doing, and the way you all responded to various challenges, particularly the external review. I think I think in summary, and others will question this, is still the experience of our staff is still where we've really got to work on, both the way we lead them, but their work experience, the rota reviews, the lived experience of working in CCAM is still work we need to do as an organisation. This is the headline I'm taking from your detailed report there. But let's follow that through in questions and comments. David, then.
Thank you. Just a couple of things, Ali. I think just sharing experience from just some of the things that we're doing. I did spend a day at Polegate where I was kicking off the second cohort for the leadership fundamentals course, and the response was absolutely phenomenal in terms of the feedback on the day from colleagues that were doing this. More of, why have we done this before? Can my manager do it? Which, of course, we have a different program doing it. And just people coming out very energized. It's a 3-day program plus a day. I think it's 6 weeks after. And coincidentally, I met a couple of colleagues who had done the sexual safety training course with me a couple of weeks before, and I asked them about their lived experience and do they think this is going to make an impact. And what they fed back to me is, at least we all now have the same understanding of what good looks like, and some people just need to hear this. So that's sort of the lived experience of some of the feedback of some of these things, of how we measure impact. It's not only about what the questionnaires we put out afterwards, it's also what people tell us. I don't want to miss the point that you said around getting people off in time. We got an SPC chart here which has been failing against a target of 5% for as long as the run chart goes, which is about 20 data points of just consistently getting people out 50% of the time late, and then on a mean that's about 50 minutes. And then we have, we wonder why we have high levels of sickness, stress, anxiety, is because we can't give people a break. So I guess the question is that in the context of the operating model, and what are we actually going to do about that? I think that's something that the board needs to consider seriously, because it is, as you said, a balance between patient safety and staff well-being, and what you've intimated there is that we may not be striking the right balance at the moment, and is the board assured that we have the right programs in place and the right decision-making process in place to be able to assess that, because at the moment we can tweak around the edges around high sickness, but unless we address some of these fundamentals, well, we're never going to get back to a balanced position.
Good challenge, and I think let's ask colleagues to reflect on that. So in terms of when we sum up action, I mean, the operating model is crucial, isn't it? Also working with our partners and the demand placed on our services. So because of the impact on someone working 12-hour shifts of an overrun is quite significant, and it affects the next day's efficiency in working. So it's a key point. Thank you. On that point, I want to move on to.
It is just there is evidence from other parts of the NHS that long shifts, overruns are associated with more mistakes, more serious incidents, more complaints, and I think this is something we really need to sort of try and triangulate when we're planning how we ask our people to work, how we look after them, because there is good evidence around the patient safety and welfare implications of this.
Super.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ali. There's a lot going on, as we know, from your reports to WWC. And just on Debbie's point on the leadership, we want to recognise Yvette as well and all the good work that she's done, because I know she's worked really hard to get that management and leadership training, and we've been asking for it for an awfully long time. So I just want to mention her. The time to hire, very well done. That's very impressive, I must say, from where we've come. Am I reading the numbers right on recruitment? 3992 against 3946.
Yep, should be.
So we are above target. Is that because of the EMAs in the EOC 111?
So we've carried out large volumes of recruitment over the last 6 months or so. So where we're anticipating ending up at year end is not far off, or pretty much on in terms of our target. So when I gave my report, I was talking about both vacancies and time to hire. So I think both things go together. So we're not expecting, I think, to be way out at the end of the year.
Okay.
So I think it's 30. I think is in terms of our target number, isn't it, David?
I think you need to go before I can.
Oh, me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure on that. I think the establishment numbers here, the target of 3946, I would like to query that, because if we look at, that's workforce page 1 out of 3, page 24, workforce 3 out of 3, page 26, tells us we will be short about 30 in field ops, but a significant gap, about 50 short in EMA. So I think I'm not comfortable with that target as it is. I think we just need to query it. What we have seen, I suspect that maybe last year's target that's not been updated for this financial year, because we know we will have some challenges, less in field ops with some of the mitigation plans that we've put in place. But we know that we have a challenge with EMAs by the end of the year. So I think we just need to query back that
Let's
back
take an
around.
action to get that right. Yeah, it's an important key. It's an important metric.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I just wanted to clarify that. And the staff survey, you said 62%, which is really great, because we had similar figure last year, I believe. Was it 63%?
61 last year and 63 in the year before that. So,
right.
But we had been used to sort of 10-15% below that. And I know from talking to HRDs and other ambulance trusts, most people are in the 40s, and there's one or two in the 30s as well. So in fact, I'm going to run a little session for the HRD group on how to get a higher response rate, because I think we are doing some good things in this area for everyone joining in this. It's not just the sort of my team, it's actually everybody taking it more seriously, actually, I think so.
Okay.
But can I be, sorry to make a point, but let's make it, that's also on the seminar about how we fixed it, because we're going to, consistently 60% people tell us the same things. So let's make sure we've got clear plans to deal with these things. I'm obviously looking at the Workforce Committee and others to spearhead that from the board point of view. Let's get to the root cause of some of the unhappiness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I was going to say was actually I'm encouraged by us seeing a very similar response rate, because I'm hoping they are keeping faith with us that we are going to improve on things, and they're staying with us, and they're going to continue having this engagement with us and telling us, what they want to see and how things are going. So do we have any early headlines about what the results might be? I know the formal results aren't due until Q4, but do we have any early headlines about what might be coming through?
Yeah, so we'll be getting raw data, which is literally only hours old, so there isn't anything to actually sort of share as such yet, but certainly next month we'll be getting our first lots of comparative data where we can see how we're doing against other people. So I suspect in 1 or 2 boards' time we'll be taking that more formally here, I think, to go to, and obviously at WWC as well.
Let's not speculate, let's get some hard facts. Yeah.
Thanks, Henry.
I apologise. Rob is next, then you.
Thank you, Jay. The question was around international recruitment and great numbers in terms of the 70 and the plans to have further. Just to check, actually, because actually the numbers in itself don't give a sense of the achievements in terms of international recruitment. So achievements is around the lived experience of the relocation, the induction, education and training, the attrition rate, as well as are there any particular issues in terms of clinical standards and so forth. So we just sort of wondered if there's a mechanism around that, and is that being picked up by the Workforce Committee?
So I can add one comment to start with, and then I'm sure others will have things to add. So first thing to say, actually, the Trust did some international recruitment 3 or 4 years ago, and I think there were some lessons to learn from that. I think is the right answer on this, because a fair number of those people actually left the organisation within the first 12 months. So what we've tried to do this time, I think, is actually learn from that and actually make sure that the induction process, the onboarding process, the reality of having someone who's a personal, if you like, link to you when you arrive here, shows you around, acts as your connection and acts as your buddy effectively. I think those kinds of things are critical. And then cohorting as well. So we know from acute experience that when you cohort international recruits, you're more likely to get a bit of a community feel to that as well. So there's lots of lessons, I think, to learn from that as well. But some of the clinical standards, I don't know if others want to add.
Again, I some point. I know there's a lot of pastoral work going on as well to make sure our new colleagues are welcomed.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. Just picking up the pastoral work's been really well received, but I wanted just to pick up on the 2nd of December, I did a big people and leadership day with about 100 of my members of staff and others from other directorates. And the reason I raised this, at the end there was an open FAQ, and we were talking about networks and supporting and staff networks and how they can support, and actually recognising a number of the international recruits come from a very diverse background. There were a number of network members and actually a couple of chairs there who volunteered to also reach out to say this is additional groups of people who may have more similarities that can support in a way that the pastoral helps, but the network adds an extra dimension as well.
The Workforce Committee will pick that up as part of the wider broader welfare agenda, but it's really good to hear, though. Thank you. Questions, colleagues?
Can I just carry on from the international recruits and the retention of them, and having done it elsewhere in the past, you do become a talent pool for other organisations that you've done all the hard work, but they then come fishing against your pool of talent. Have we put any retention strategies or anything in with these recruits?
So this is the tricky bit, isn't it, in the end, is because what we need to do is make sure that these people have a really good experience with us. I think it's fair to say, and this is partly anecdote, partly stat, but actually a lot of people specifically chose us because of the way we've actually hired them. So they chose not to go, which our major competitors really going to be London, in terms of the fringes with London and where people can get a higher London higher allowance. So the people specifically chose us, and we made sure that we're actually giving those people additional time and attention. As an organisation, the issue of retention payments and those kinds of things, I think in the end, if you're not having a great experience, you'll go anyway. So I think that the key to it is actually making sure that these people will have a really good experience while they're with us. So, but you're right, it is a risk that we need to keep monitoring. I think particularly at the fringes, that's always going to be an issue.
Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to reiterate, so the things I picked up from the IQR were the time to hire, as you mentioned, was a really good trend, and also active suspensions, significant increase, which is a really, I think, very positive move there. I hope that's for the picking up the bullying and harassment items. I think that's a really positive trend. The only item of curiosity that I had and challenge, I was quite stunned by, I've seen the annual rolling turnover rate quoted before of 18%. I saw for the first time presumably with the new SPC charts, the turnover rate in the EOC West, East and West and 111 of over 40 or over 40%. And I know there are plans to reduce these by or to 10% by May 2023. I'm curious as to how we're going to do that. That sort of level of turnover rate implies there's something really fundamentally wrong somewhere, either with the people we're recruiting or with the job that we're giving them, or the rate at which we're paying them. Yeah, that's my curiosity.
Yeah, I think we also need to understand the figures. Sometimes within that 40% of people go on to have a career with elsewhere in CCAM, but nevertheless, the turnover is still very high, isn't it? So Emma, Ali, any comments on that, and particularly what remedial action are we taking to try and improve the working environment?
Do you want to pick up that? You go for it, won't you? So
you can let me go first. Thank you. I'd like to go back to something that David said. I think what we have to be really mindful here is saying that we need to change the environment. Actually, the reason we're having this turnover is because the work that they are currently facing, the relentlessness that they are currently facing. So the challenge for me is, and I think for all of us, is I do think the move to Medway will create a nicer physical environment, but all the time that activity is as it is at the moment, and we are seeing the pressures, it's going to impact on the sickness, it's going to impact on the turnover. This, I think, is a symptom of the model needing a significant review and us changing the way that we do culture, people, etc. But I think we have to do those two things together. So I hear what you're saying, Howard. I think the challenge is I don't think we should look at these as individual actions of things that need to be done. I think we're going to have to be brave and start saying these are symptoms of a much bigger problem, and we now need to start really having a conversation about how we tackle that root cause, as well as doing some of the other work, if that makes sense.
If I say, I mean, a detailed point as he listed the strategic answer, which is what boards are for, really. You know, look at some key metrics, and it just shows a more underlying problem. And I think this is one of the issues that the board has struggled with, the organisation has struggled with. I think is what I'm hoping is part of certainly about the improvement journey and the focus work that we've got. Everything from improved leadership style, and the way we're now developing our leaders in the organisation, the working environment, and the broader relationship with the rest of the health economy. And others, is to take that pressure off, because quite frankly it's remorseless. And once a heart goes out, these are our lowest paid staff at band 3 in many cases. We're putting in spite of some excellent training that goes on, and many of them go on to progress to other careers with us, is a really pressurised job. So I think there is something as part of our work we need to put together as a board, and perhaps through the workforce committee ensure that we've got oversight of this particular challenge. But I think, Emma, your point, it's not just down for you to solve this. This is multifactorial input, this for the board to take a serious interest in, and I think that's something we really do need to flag up, I think, in terms of turnover in the OC, quality staff we recruit, the way they're led, and the general working environment. So I need to just to pull that out. It's a key action point going forward. And work has been done there, so I'm not being critical of efforts that's happened to date, but we just need to repick that as a major issue.
Yeah, I was going to check one thing. Howard, you're right to pick up. I think there might be a typo in this. I think it should be by 10%. By May 20, not 2. So thank you for that. That's a good statistical. I was looking at it with horror, actually looking at that. So I think that and a slight kind of, I might need to ring myself actually, but I think
despite the artifacts, it's a major issue though. We need to recognise that, and we need. It's one we have to be united on. It's seeking to work our way through it. Michael, were you about to make a comment?
Yeah, it's just a question. I welcome Suba's expertise in this. So we're doing a lot of good things. I have no doubt about all of them. The problem you have with training is, and it relates to the point that Emma just said about the pressure on our people. You go on a training course, you learn some really good things. You go back to the day job. The pressure is immense, and your ability to change your behaviour or operate in different ways is significantly challenged. So I suppose my question is, Ali, and I know this, struggled with it in my previous executive career, how do you know whether this training is working? Have we got an evaluative framework for, and reading between the lines in your escalation report, I didn't get the impression that you were fully confident, Subu, in that space. I appreciate the difficulties, but are we, because also, to be frank, this costs money. What I really want to know is that it's having an impact, it's delivering change, and we don't have to repeat it, and I have you a view on this? I don't know who wants to answer that, Birmingham.
Shall I go first? I'm more than happy to go. So I think the actual answer for CCAM, where we stand at the moment, is that for some of the things that we do, we have some evaluation in place. It's never going to be. It's not at the level that I would expect yet. So, for example, the sexual safety workshops, as an example. So we have an evaluation plan for that, which we'll implement in January, February time. So, but that will start to measure actually whether or not it's made any difference in terms of people's understanding, people's behaviours, those kinds of things. So, what we need to do, I think, is the same evaluation for all the other types of training that we're doing as well. In order of priority for me, for CCAM, I think the first thing has been to get the training in place. So and the right and sort of the right stand, all the rest of it. So the evaluation is sort of like it's that walk before you run kind of thing. I think actually we need to make sure that all of the right programs in place for all our different levels of development we need to do, and the evaluation will follow with all of them at both individual and team and managerial levels. So which we'd normally do. So, but yes, I think we're very early on that. I think is the honest answer on that.
Shall I comment? Did you want to make a comment, Martin, on the finance side?
It's not about the finance. It's some of the discussions we've been having at planning and at the exec. We recognise this is a complex picture. I think one of the key things we're going to do next year is a cascade of strategic objectives down to business units, down to individuals, and therefore we can assess what people's needs are, but we can also measure what the outcome is. And if we do our reviews properly of individuals' performance, then we can make sure that we're getting the outcome from the training that we need. And I think the key element will be that cascade down, which is a fundamental part of how we're doing the planning this year.
Let's finish. Shall I just finish? Oh.
Really was encourage you to, can we get up the pace, please?
Yeah, just the only comment really on this is, yes, we are looking at evaluation frameworks, and we asked precisely that question, in fact, in WWC. However, my experience tells me, however great the evaluations, that's not really what we're looking for. What I want to see is a change in some of these key things, precisely the sort of thing that Martin has just mentioned. The hard metrics have got to change, because unless behaviour changes, and we don't see it in the number of appraisals, the quality of the appraisals, the number of bullying and harassment claims that are coming through, and how people are being treated in their one-to-ones, departmental meetings and so on, unless those core things change, none of this will have had the kind of impact that we want. So however good people say the training has been, it has to result in behaviour change, otherwise we have failed.
Thank you. Tom?
I'm very much along the same lines as Subu, because obviously we receive a lot of data here through the IQR, and those are the metrics that will tell us over time whether all these other initiatives are doing what we hope they will do. And I suppose for me it's a case of what's the review date and what are the 4 or 5 things that we as a board would want to see really change, because that's our success criteria, isn't it? And obviously the staff survey is another part of that evidence, because it's not just about evaluating an individual programme, it's about our whole culture. This.
Thank you. No, that's, and then we'll bring that up in the summary. Okay. Thank you, Kareem. You've said we need to say. Thank you. Is there anything else in terms of the BAF risks and improvement journey and the IQR? Because there's some important stuff, some important issues there that Ali and others have raised. I mean, what we're hearing is improvements in the recruitment pipeline, the process, the mechanics, improvements in the way the HR department is functioning in terms of supporting the rest of the business. We've now also got to tackle internally the lived experience of our staff, the way they're led. Again, we've heard about progress with leadership development programme, which is good to hear, the recruitment improvements, etc. And what I would also ask is what's coming out is particular concerns regarding the EOC, the working environment, and this is a board concern, because it's a multifactorial input in this to resolve this. It links back to operating model as much as it does to the working experience and the way those staff are managed within EOC. So that certainly is some important work we need to pull out. And the evaluation point, yes, let's have an evaluation in due course, but we've got some pretty good metrics in the meantime. Turnover and the staff survey is a pretty good indication about whether we've been successful or not in some of our actions, but we then need to build in a more appropriate, more academic rigour then into the evaluation. There's plenty of experts we can call on to do that.
Just one final one. In the 2 recommendations, Chair, one of the recommendations is obviously more straightforward, which is just recommending the board continue to support the work we're doing on culture. So, but the first one is around agreeing the new culture and leadership risks. So I just wanted to make sure that was.
Yeah, thank you. I think we all can do that. David?
I think yes, but the actions that we have within that need to be reflective of some of the pressures that we've described today. I think because you're not going to be able to address the culture as long as people are on what I describe as survival mode. And just speaking to colleagues who 5 shifts in a row finishing and overrun by 2 hours, of course we have some of these issues. So I think that needs to be a fundamental part of how we think about cultures, how we protect staff from some of the pressures that were.
There's an urgency to this, and in terms of the board developments, I think it's important that we've put time aside in January to really get into this as a board. We need to be absolutely clear to the organisation what kind of organisation. Again, in partnership with the organisation, that question of the board telling, it's going to be bottom up as much as we need to prescribe here. What is the culture that we want to see in CCAM? What's the working experience we want for our staff, and how are we going to make sure that that's delivered, as well as the experience of our patients, and hence why the improvements, the work that Rob is leading on our quality improvement programme is absolutely crucial that we bring all of it together. So there's a unified story for development of CCAM, and that's the crucial work for early in the new year. As a board, we must sign that off. Okay, let's move us on. So still the East Kent's maternity review, Fiona, is something which we have been encouraged to take note of, and I think it's a very important piece of work.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Interesting for a medical director to report under culture and leadership at a board meeting. But this is following discussions with my non-exec colleagues and also with the exec. This report, which was published on the 19th of October, all trusts have been asked to take note of and note the recommendations. It's a harrowing report to read. It contains multiple examples of really poor care, of lack of compassion, lack of leadership. It is different to many of the previous reports in that it does not contain an action plan with multiple different actions, but merely 5 recommendations. But what I've tried to do in this summary is to pull out the cultural similarities between this report and what we've seen in CCAM. And on page 5 of the report, you'll see that I've highlighted 9 different areas, which I think reflect what happened in East Kent and what we've also seen in our organisation. So it's an opportunity for the board to reflect on this, to discuss this, and also to reflect whether the areas highlighted here are fully covered in our culture and leadership programme and in the improvement journey.
Fiona, I hope you're setting a trend there, actually. It's great to hear the medical director talking about culture, because actually what we want this organisation to be, we've used the words, but not always managed to achieve it. We want it to be clinically led. And that's something which I'm passionate about. I know everyone, all the members of the board are as well, is to ensure that we are making sure that our clinicians have got a strong voice in the direction of service of the and clearly what they didn't have in East Kent, sadly, in that they didn't have clinical leadership. They had aberrant behaviour among the clinicians, and they didn't have teamwork, and that's something we've got to make sure. I think we can aspire to improve on that and be really ready for it. So I really appreciated the report and bringing out the key cultural challenges that we face and what we're going to do to tackle it. So, colleagues, any comments on the on that report, on that, and particularly in terms of focusing lessons learned there? We've also had our critics as well. What lessons, any headlines you wanted to sort of put down at this stage in terms of it's going to be an important part of addressing the culture of CCAM as well for the future? Chris?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Fiona, for that report. I thought it was excellent. Really, some of the things that we're facing in the organisation here. I think the question for me that's still troubling me is that, are we a learning organisation?
We're not where we need to be, but we are making steps in the right direction. I think we can demonstrate through the themes that come out of our serious incidents, both in terms of the themed investigations and also where we pick up individual areas where the care provided has not been to the right sort of standard, and can address that with both all our staff and with individual members of our staff to to learn from instances and disseminate that across the organisation. It's a challenge, and we've reflected at this board the difficulty in engaging with our staff and making sure that everybody learns lessons and is aware of what's going on across the trust. But I think it's glib to say we're on a journey, but that's what the improvement journey is about, and we can give good examples of where we have produced areas of learning. I think one other thing I would say is that it's really interesting that we weren't involved in this investigation.
Yeah.
And we have reflected with our heads of midwifery across the whole of the South East, the lessons from the Ockenden report, because there is one parallel there, which is that teams that work together should train together. And I know that Dawn Kerslake, our consultant midwife, has done a great deal to involve midwives across the area to work with us.
Thank you. We do have a unique perspective on the patient pathway and on the paternity pathway in particular. So I do think we should encourage us. We should make sure we do have our voice heard.
I think I agree, Fiona. It is a very harrowing report, and I think what struck a lot of people was how much this is about culture and behaviours, and how relatively little it was about the technical and clinical elements of what went wrong. And so I think, you're right. There are some really strong parallels. I think, earlier in the year, before I was at CCAM, looking at the CCAM board reports and looking, as we've discussed, at how dense the information was in the then IPR and that it was RAG rated. I think if we were still in that position, this should have been a warning shot to us to change. But the making data count work and the IQR, I think, is a demonstrable improvement and a mitigation against not seeing what's in front of you at board level, which this report was critical of. I think the standard of clinical behaviour, technical care is not enough piece, does resonate with me a lot here. I think we know the CQC have continually said the quality of care that is delivered by the frontline teams is good. However, we know that that's not enough, and this report, I think, emphasises that. So everything we've just discussed around why culture and leadership has to be a mainstay, why we put the training programmes on, why we evaluate them, why we have difficult conversations about sexualised behaviour, and we say no, that is not acceptable. All of that, I think, gives us some steps absolutely into the right direction. And then I think the last point, the organisational behaviour, looking good whilst doing badly piece, I think that I've seen in the last 6 months at board level a real acceptance and probably a degree of internal reflection that possibly might have taken a little while as a board for us to get to. So I think you can see when NHS England and CQC and other regulators are leaning in and inspecting and instructing and telling people that things aren't good. You can see that there's a human reaction, I think, at board level to feel the pain of that. And I think I think the positive thing about CCAM and the board here is that there was a demonstrable change I personally felt between kind of June, July into August, September, where we were all using the same language about, okay, it's done. The inspection is done. The report is done. What are we focusing on improvement journey? And I think what the East Kent report said to me was, if you get stuck in the place of it's okay, we don't believe that report, we don't believe, or the regulator just decides to change a chief exec and a chair every few years, which was also criticised, you don't get to the root of the problem at board level. And I think the ownership of the improvement journey and the language that the board is using is a million miles away from what this Kirkup review says about the board at East Kent. So I think whilst there's parallels, I can also see some really, really positive signs of improvement at board level that would mitigate, this organisation getting anywhere near to the position that East Kent found them in, according to the Kirkup review.
Oh, well said. I mean, the Kirkup report covers over 10 years. Why these things can't be left to gestate, because they don't get better by leaving them alone. So absolutely fair point. Subo, then Elizabeth, please. Subo.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Siobhan. Yes, indeed, the culture of denial, I think, that has existed in this organisation. I think I can see some changes. And thank you, Fiona, for pulling out the themes. The one theme in here that perhaps, it's an observation, it's not really a question. Junior staff insufficiently nurtured and developed. So we know that when we get our newly qualified paramedics and we get people who are new into the organisation, they don't always have a very happy time. And in fact, they're the ones that leave fairly quickly. And we're seeing that in some of our metrics that we observe at WWC. So I think there's some learning in there for us about how we support our newly qualified paramedics. It's not just about having mentoring and coaching. They do need to have clinical supervision, and we know there are plans to put some clinical supervision in place, but it's a very important part of their growth, their development. And we know in terms of a career pathway, those newly qualified paramedics see themselves as going through a career pathway in this organisation, and they see themselves developing their clinical skills. And it's very important that we nurture that and we develop that, and that they can see that happening in this organisation. Similarly, staff that are working in corporate functions, they too can see a development pathway, whether they come in at whatever grade and however junior they may be, that they are nurtured and supported and trained, and we get the learning from them. You know, if they fail at something, you know, we don't look to blame, we look to learn. So it's just something for us to note.
Thanks, Chair. Fiona, what happens to this next? And are we going to cascade this within the organisation? I think it's a great review, very open and honest, and with what you've pulled out, with the synergies with us and then the recommendations, I wouldn't like to just lose this review.
Good challenge. I think the most appropriate way, probably, I'm looking to Ali, is whether we could include this in the fundamentals course in some way. It's how best to.
Ali, you want to respond?
I mean, this is not something that we can include in the maternity training. It is not a clinical report. It is to build on the changes in culture and leadership in the organisation, but also I think to highlight what patients found so very important, and that was being listened to. And actually, I think our staff are pretty good at that. I'm not aware of many, if any, complaints where our staff are on scene and they are not listened to by patients. That's something that very often comes through in compliments.
I think probably what we need to do is work through it properly, I think, rather than sort of like a off-the-cuff reaction. I think there's so much in this, isn't there, about organisational level stuff, team level stuff, individual level stuff. I think it's too complex a picture, I think, to give a simple answer to. So I think what we need to do is work through what is the appropriate bits we can include and where do they go into our programmes of improvement.
Perhaps, can I say as an action, could you both Ali and Fiona just pull out the sort of key themes in the headline. We've got a board session in January where to respond to Siobhan's lead regarding sort of board behaviour and board leadership at this matter. This is important. It's one of the things where the board should put some markers in the ground regarding the culture we want in this organisation. Professional rivalries won't be tolerated as they were in East Kent. And that's the heart of this. Midwives and consultants didn't get on, didn't work together collaboratively in the interest of the patients. We've got to make sure that's no one's ever going to accuse CCAM of that. Well, we've got a multi-professional workforce in this organisation, increasing numbers of other professions joining us. Let's make sure it doesn't happen here. Leadership behaviour was inappropriate there. The board didn't listen. Let's make sure we're listening. And we've also got an excellent consultant midwife. And leaving aside this wasn't a clinical report, we do do some great maternity services in this trust, you know, unlike other ambulance trusts. Let's make sure the board and others are aware of the work that we do in that area and make sure that people understand that. And because our crews do enjoy that aspect of work, and it's been one of the most positive aspects of training, hasn't it? When they go to the education sessions, they want more of it. They want more of Dawn and her lectures. So I think there's a number of themes in here, but let's pick out the governance issues first, which the board can begin to address. Then I think there's more specifics then that must reflect it back in management training and development. So probably the combination of Quality Patient Safety Committee for the clinical aspects, but the Workforce Committee, please, working with Fiona and Ali regarding the leadership aspects of this. So good challenge to Liz, thank you for that. Let's pick that out and make sure we take it forward. Can I move us on to the Workforce and Wellbeing Committee report? Sue, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to take it as read and really just focus on the last 2 points for escalation. So I think given what we've heard today at board and what we know about certainly winter pressures and how our staff are feeling, I think the committee really felt that we need to see greater visibility of health and wellbeing of our staff at board level. To enable that to happen, we were thinking about having some metrics in the IQR, but in the meantime having a specific paper at board around health and wellbeing to ensure that we really do have oversight and keep an eye on this. And then secondly, training and development. I think the theme through a number of committees really that we've seen recently is that the need for training is highlighted, but it's being highlighted on a number of different areas. And the sort of challenge for us is how do we square that with the level of abstraction that we have. So I think it's important that the board helps to prioritise what we think are the really important things around training so that staff are not pulled in 100 different directions. So I think that would be a really important thing. So I just want to highlight that as well.
Any comments, questions of the Chair of Workforce? You happy with those escalation points? Are you happy that we've got work in place to deal with them?
Thank you, Chair. I think the escalation around the well-being ties in very well with the discussion we've just had before around the impact on sickness and just generally driving the culture. So I think it's a timely escalation.
Noted. Can we now move on to, does anyone have to say on that matter, it's an important issue? Okay, let's move on now to the delivering healthcare, modern healthcare section, operational performance and efficiency. Emma, Director of Operations.
Thank you, and I'll try and be brief. I'm aware of timing. I'll take the paper as read. I think things just I would like to note. We've mentioned performance. I think it's really important to note again the position that we are in terms of our performance against national ARP targets, but also where we are in comparison to our neighbours and other ambulance services nationally. We still maintain a positive position in terms of being mid-pack for C1 through C4, although noting we have had some real challenges over the last couple of months with call handling. So I wanted just to have that noted, please. I will also just note about hospital handovers. We knew going into winter it was going to be more challenging, and that's exactly what we're beginning to see. We do speak probably daily with commissioners in various places, if not hourly at the moment with some of the challenges that we're having, and my team are doing a fantastic job at having really positive relationships, and this is about mutual respect but at the same time a respectful challenge as well. So we're working on that. I think within the paper I have identified 4 areas, just recognising the winter plan. We did deliver the winter plan as was requested as part of the national framework, and what was noted by the commissioners was that actually within it there isn't an awful lot of new things, but that was in conversation we felt we needed to focus on doing the core business and working positively around pathways, working positively around collaborative working. We've mentioned the Falls programme with the lovely story that we saw. Then just moving on, I've picked up the efficiency targets, and these were some trajectory we put together at the beginning of the financial year based on assumptions from last financial year. The only one, as you can see, that just about lands with where we thought we'd be at the end of Q2 is the C190th. But I think the most important message I would like the board to hear today is, having reviewed the way that we developed these trajectories and done quite a lot of work with David and his team and Martin and his team, it's really challenged the way that we created the assumptions on which these trajectories sat. And I think if we reflect on the development through the SPCs, the making data count, I would say that we are much more informed and much more understanding of information than we were previously. So I think it's within the paper I do recognise that the assumptions now on reflection were probably aspirational and not as realistic as they needed to be. I do mention briefly the operating model, which I won't go on because we've spoken about a number of times here. Fundamentally, this needs a root and branch change. The last thing for us is the SVCC, so that's the single virtual contact centre for 111. The funding envelope for our Kent, Medway and Sussex 111 service has been approved. It is a different looking model to that which we won the bid for, and it is much more focusing on the call handling with a smaller clinical CAS, because the commissioners are very clear that those downstream clinical services are there to receive the streaming of those clinical calls. So we are transitioning through a programme of where we are now, moving to the new model for the financial year. So that's probably all I wanted to cover today, Chair. But happy to take questions.
We'll come back and maybe particularly we'll pick up that point about the aspirations, about what that means for 111 going forward, and also our public profile regarding that service. Colleagues, questions, comments from Emma regarding the headlines from the operation performance and efficiency. David?
My only comment, Emma, is just a concern around the call answer time. It's a special cost variation. And we've seen from the previous SPC charts on the workforce section that we are planning to be about 20% short in whole time equivalents by the end of the financial year. So I think there's a concern there from a patient safety perspective.
Thank you. Without a doubt, that's the area that is causing greatest concern at the moment. Again, this morning at 9 o'clock, I met with Margaret and Richard, so Deputy Medical Director and Deputy Director of Quality and Nursing, plus the senior EOC team, to have a little bit of a mini summit of what are we going to do, and putting everything on the table. Nothing was off the table. There's some things that we can do that we feel would actually have an impact in the shorter term. There's steps that we may have felt have not been the right steps to take previously, but actually when we're in a position of having a 2 to 3 to more for like 5-minute call answer mean, this is where that balance of risk needs to be. So they're being written up, there'll be quality impact assessments, and we will look to take them through the right governance, but to try and enact some of them a little bit more quickly.
I mean, clearly it's an urgent matter, isn't it? And that's the important thing, is that urgency is communicated from the board. I think we can't, not for us to prescribe the detail, but we want to be assured that there's attention being paid, and that everyone is working collectively to improve that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, other colleagues? In terms of questions, Emma, sorry, Paul. my right peripheral vision.
Some of the very quick ones. This I'm hoping will help improve the IQR cross.
Sound has gone.
So, as you know, off the back of the rota review that was done, there were a number of grievances that were raised by staff. Those have now all been heard, and Peter and Richard are in the final steps of wrapping up the outcomes so that we can share that with staff. But fundamentally, they still need to go ahead. We need to understand what steps we need to take to allow us now to move forward.
Yeah, so will we be getting sort of a timetable of implementation at some point?
Yes, we spoke to Peter today to understand the timeline of letters coming out, because the communication is really important, that we then give people the opportunity to really understand what is being said in those letters and the next step. So yes, there will be a timeline.
Can we take an action after the workforce committee then to oversee to ensure we're clear on the timetable for the rota reviews? Important point of just making sure we keep our staff on side as we take that forward. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Hima, for the report. The kind of two things that still concern me is the operating model, and I think you've already alluded to that. And I think, what assurance do you give to your staff at this particular moment? And second point, I just want to sort of comment is that this is a season of goodwill. What good news are you going to give to your staff?
Wow. Okay, the first one around the operating model. I think everyone knows it doesn't work right now, and that they all want to be part of how they make it better, because we're not addressing getting to our patients in a timely fashion. So even at the people culture leadership program, that the workshop I did on the 2nd, a lot of the conversations there were the enablers and the blockers for people to do their jobs. So when we talk about the operating model, for me, that's not just how we answer the calls and the way they're categorised, it's the way the teams are set up, it's the way that we do governance and oversight. I described the operational team leaders as sponges because they get given so much to do, and we try and expect them to be experts in everything. So when we talk about the operating model, it's the structures as well as the processes and the clinical delivery mechanisms. They're all up for that. The question is, how do we do it and when do we do it? That's really what they're asking for. In terms of goodwill, so I think there are some positives that are out there. There are some really good stories, and we do try and use those individual stories to really try and support some narratives. So the CFRs helping with falls, the CFRs are aligned to all of our operating units and they work really well. So seeing some of that improvement is really good. We do support our teams over Christmas because obviously they work 24/7. So we do try to make sure that they have a small amount of sort of petty cash to get themselves some additional, usually sugar and carbs to keep people going over Christmas. But actually what we've done this year is given it to them and said, you do what you want to do with it. And that I think has been received really well. It's the small things, Chris, right now, I think, because saying thank you, us going around and saying thank you to individual people and giving them some time, actually, when we can't give them an awful lot, giving them some time where we can, I think has been quite positive. And the commitment this year, and the board made a decision that when we went to REAP level 4, we were not going to stop training. I think that's had a really significant impact this year because actually if you look at our key skills, you look at our statutory and mandatory, last financial year, it was absolutely so difficult to deliver because it was on again, it was off again. So I think when they see some commitments to us, we can then build on that and say, so what's next year look like? What's going to be better? And I think we're doing more of that.
Let's hope that gets reflected in the staff survey because some very important points there, particularly around the statutory mandatory training. I think which you brought out there.
Just quickly on performance, Emma. So just looking at 111, and we probably don't talk about 111 enough, do we? So it might be something for us to think about what other metrics or what links we want to make. But the report, the IQR says that the call activity and demand is significantly above what our commissioned envelope is, and that was before the recent weeks with Strep A. So I guess I'm just checking, in the actions that are being taken, is there anything we can pull forward to do quicker or go further with? Because the context for 111 is quite different to probably when the report was written.
Yeah, thank you. 111 I think is very different because it's treated in a different way on a national scale. So we know that, for example, last week I think there was about a 45% abandonment rate nationally because of the volumes that everyone is seeing around not just Strep A but generally paediatric respiratory conditions. It's quite difficult while we're in that transition from the current model to the new one. The team are working with particularly through the SVCC to also ask nationally what additional support there is around paediatric casualty support. And at the moment, there hasn't been a huge amount additional coming. The challenge fundamentally is having enough people. And even if we had full establishment, we'd still have really poor performance because of the volumes. Again, working with commissioners, because they are the ones that have commissioned us for this, we are saying to them, you need to make sure those downstream providers are really prepared to do this, because actually that's the model they're commissioning. In the short term, unfortunately, there's probably not an awful lot more that we can do. The national team put in the national IVR messages, so that's where when you call up you can press 1 or 2 and they give you an idea more of what's happening. I just think we're in extraordinary circumstances, and the challenge we've got, and I think this is why we're seeing more 999 calls at the moment, is because when people are concerned and they sit on the phone for 20 minutes waiting to get through to 111, it just raises levels of anxiety, which then means, you know what, I'll call 999, because even if it means it takes 2 or 3 minutes to get through, it's still only 2 or 3 minutes rather than 20 minutes. So I think this is going to take quite a long time to even out over the winter.
Can I say we have some focus action? I agree in the short term, I think we're under significant pressure here, but well-intentioned national initiatives can have some unintended reasonable consequences, and I suspect this could be one of them. So can I also ask that we're watching this closely, and we must push back. If we're seeing detriment to quality of patient services because of this single virtual quality setup, we really must make sure that that's escalated through the appropriate NHS channels, because quite frankly, they don't take the responsibility for the performance of this organisation, we do. And we've got to make sure that that's absolutely correct. The other point you mentioned, the start, which I think I do want us to pick up, not necessarily now, but I think it needs to come out through the Quality and Patient Safety Committee, is the change in commission of intentions in terms of commissioning 111 for next year. That's their right to do so, perfectly understand that, but let's track the consequences of that and make sure we push back again, because we'll take the criticism, not the commissioners, for any detriment to service. And what I'm hearing is, however it's long to get through to 111, when you do get through, you generally have a positive experience, particularly if you come away with your prescription or signposting another provider. If that's got to go, or some that's going to go, the signposting of the providers is going to go, let's make sure we tell people about that, and it doesn't lead to criticism of this organisation as a result. I'm going to put pressure on our staff, because they take the brunt of this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It shouldn't mean that there is less signposting. It shouldn't mean that there is less revalidation of 999 or EDs. What it should mean is that rather than the Directory of Service sending calls into our CAS, our Clinical Advice Service, it pushes them to primary care, it pushes them to urgent care. But you're right, that's the gateway that we're going to have to monitor, because if it's not open and flowing, they'll hit it and bounce back.
Relations with ICBs will be tested, but we must feed back on that, because, say, our staff bear the consequences. Can I move us on? Tom, you look really well. Want to make a comment?
Just one. So yes, so we're going to monitor this, but when are we going to review it? So is there a hard date when, say, for example, it might come to quality of patient safety?
We are doing the transition of the model now between now and the end of March. So it will. It's a bit of an iterative process, but I think the totality of it should be in place for the beginning of the financial year, because my learned colleague to my left is very clear that the money is the money, and we now need to make sure that we cut our cloth accordingly. So as that change happens, we will be monitoring, but I think it won't fully land probably until the beginning of the financial year. So my proposal would be to come to QPSC probably a month or so after that to give you a bit of an update on how the transition's gone and any potential. I mean, obviously, if it needs to be escalated before that, we will, but probably I'd be looking to come to you in May.
Put that on the track. It's an important piece of work, and going forward. Okay. Can I move on to just the headlines from the Performance Committee, Howard? I think we've covered most of the issues, but
yeah, I think most issues have been covered. The one item for escalation was around the Hear and Treat project, where there's obviously a project going on. We looked at the stats. So there was an improvement from around about 6 or 7% to about 9 or 10% during 2021, when there were higher levels of SMP. However, there is a target of 13%, and I guess we concluded we're only really partially assured in achieving that, mainly because of the massive requirement to increase the clinical hours. I think at the start of the project, at least, we were 50% short of clinical hours to deliver the 13% target. And I think there's just a risk around us being able to deliver that sort of number of hours and achieve our Hear and Treat target of 13%.
Is this who's leading on this in terms of the Hear and Treat work?
So part of this brief summit this morning actually included some Hear and Treat options as well. So again, writing those up to start driving some of that, and I'll be overseeing that and driving that through.
Right. So we have an improvement plan with some dates, and then that can be reviewed by the appropriate board governance board committee? Because Howard, we are making some changes to the performance committee, aren't we? So
yes, yeah. So that sort of the performance committee is disbanded forthwith, and we'll make sure we pick up all the various different.
And just for the listener, that does not mean performance is not getting the attention it deserves. It's just as part of the board effectiveness review, and to ensure the performance is seen as the whole board's responsibility rather than just the work of an individual committee. Not that it ever was in that sense, but that could be the perception. We ensure that the performance is given appropriate headlines, both in finance, but also financial resources, but quality and patient safety, as well as the board. And hopefully the discussion today is highlighting the detail of the performance report is coming out in board discussion. So that's, but nevertheless, we set up the performance report for a specific reason some 3 years ago. We're now moving that development on, and I assume colleagues are comfortable with that, and we need to make sure that happens. It's a positive change rather than negative. Okay, thank you for that. So I think we concluded on that important section in terms of performance. We've obviously noticed the pressures service staff are under view with some concern because changes in the 111 the way it's organised beyond the control of CCAMP, just to make sure though that we don't end up with reputational damage for implementing commissioner wishes, and there's work to be done there to ensure appropriate experience for the patients. But thank you for that. The big area of concern I think is around the pressure on EOC, the staff within it. Note there's remedial work in place to try and deal with that with the urgency it deserves. So I think that's the major headline from your report is that let's deal with the response times as best we can, support the staff. The Quality and Patient Safety Committee will track the clinical impact of that, but that's something which the board will keep very much to the front of attention, and I know it's got the executive attention over the next weeks and months. So thank you for that. And can we give that message to the staff as well, because these things can come across as we're being critical of people. One thing that struck me talking to some staff the other day involved in this work, the pressure they're under is absolutely tremendous. So can we please get the message across? The board is not being unreasonable here. The board want to be supportive to our staff, some of our lowest paid staff doing the most difficult job in the organisation, and we really need to make sure we're all together to make sure that happens. That's the message we want to give, but we have to improve performance though. Thank you for that. Let's move on. Working with partners, item 7322. Who's going to lead on this?
It's me.
Martin. Forgive me, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So, a little bit of context. We're testing out the new board report in part 2 this afternoon, as we committed to last time. I'll be referring to the finance section of the IQR report for this section. And remember, we said that once we've done the main board report, then the following month we're going to update the IQR so it's more relevant for what we need. The areas of focus, we're focusing on BAF risks 14, 17, but mainly 16, which is about financial sustainability. The main 4 areas of the financial sustainability and partnerships journey, part of the improvement journey, are dealing with the in-year financial sustainability, strategy and planning for next year, board effectiveness and exec effectiveness, and also an element on procurement improvement. So quick run through them before I go through the numbers. The financial sustainability work is on plan. We've done the initial review, identifying the level of risk that we're running for year end. We've started the phase 1 meetings with all the directorates to recover the financial position by year end, and that's going reasonably well. I'll mention that in a minute. Peter and I are working together on the board effectiveness and exec effectiveness, and I've made some changes to my internal governance within my areas of purview. David started doing the same, and we're going to be sharing that with Peter so that maybe we can help our colleagues with some knotty problems they've got in their own areas to make sure we get the governance working well. Procurement, I've just signed off on a procurement improvement plan following the external review. I've also asked the internal audit to do a follow-up review to make sure that we get a comprehensive picture of how performance is working. Because if we don't get that right, we're wasting money, and we can't afford to waste money So we need to get that functioning well. So I'll go quickly through where we are. So as at the period under review, which is to 31st of October 22, we're currently got a deficit of 2.7 million against a target of 2 million. So we're technically at 650,000 off target at the moment. We know the underlying risks are about 8.9 million. The work we've done with Directorate colleagues have identified 5 million currently of that. We're going through phase 2 to try and get that down as close as possible. You will remember I mentioned that because of the shift by our commissioners very late in the year, withdrawing 2 million of funding, that we might be left with a 2 million potential deficit by year end. We will do everything we can to mitigate that, but that's our target at the moment, to get from 8.9 down to that 2 million. And once we've done that, then we'll see what we can do beyond that. I'd focus on a couple of things. I don't think we paid enough attention to cash management. We've been eroding our cash base significantly. There was a lot of money flowing through the COVID period, and it's quite clear from the numbers that, like most organisations, we were growing our cash balance, but we've been eroding it quite quickly since 31st of March. We are a capital-heavy organisation because of the level of fleet, our new estate, and the fact that not all the money we get for capital is backed by cash, so we have to pay for it ourselves, which basically means we need to make surpluses to afford an appropriate capital plan going forward. It's allied to the fact we've not been good at delivering cash releasing recurrent savings. We've relied probably in the last few years more on non-recurrent means. That is another reason why your cash balance gets eroded over time. So the focus will be on recurrent savings for this work that we're doing with our director colleagues, and about cash releasing savings and taking that into next year. One of the changes we'll make for next year on the planning round is we're going to move from business cases, which seem to have, it's a process that isn't working for anybody, I think, to be perfectly honest at the moment. But it has been focused more about how do I get more money to spend, as opposed to how do I make improvements. So we're going to change it to an improvement case process using the Six Sigma approach, and it will have to be focused on improving at least one of 3 major areas: performance of the organisation, the finance of the organisation, or the quality of the organisation. And if it's not hitting at least one of those, then actually I'd question why we would be doing it. Ideally, if you focus on one of them, you tend to get improvements in other areas at the same time. So we should be able to hit more than one at the same time. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Before we get to questions, just so it's some important stuff in there, but just so I think that the headline is regarding our financial performance, and it's important we deliver our promises as an organisation, otherwise our credibility is shot. In terms of our financial predictions, was there a number of risks there? Are we broadly meeting our going to be meeting our financial commitments, or is there still some significant risk there?
Well, there's always risk, because the more you look at the numbers, the more people find more things they want to spend money on, quite often. But I'm pretty confident we can get to that 2 million deficit position. Getting beyond that will take a big push for the organisation, and that's the bit I'd like to be clear on.
I think the board's position is, if what we promise, we must deliver. Yeah. We can't deliver, we must have a reason for not delivering. So that's an important point, and I thank you for your diligence in and the way that the Executive College have responded to that particular issue, and the discipline that's clearly in place to try and get us to that year end, because all of the briefings that the Chief Executive and I have heard in various meetings, next year is going to be a particularly challenging year, and we don't want to make it any worse than it could be. So we need to end the year where we thought we might. So thank you for that summary. But let's listen into detail. Subo.
Thank you, Martin. You can probably anticipate my questions. The change to the business case process to focus on improvement is very welcome. So thank you for that. I support the fact, and obviously I know that we have a deficit and we need to find cost savings. I'm concerned about our work on culture and all the work that we're doing to improve that. And we know that we need to make investments. The HR and OD team has been particularly challenged, both in terms of capacity as well as in other areas around capability. So I need some assurance really that where we do make cost savings, we are not going to blow off course any of these key pieces of work that we need. And we've all accepted that without a culture change, nothing else is going to improve in this organisation. So I would like to have some assurance, please, that when we're looking at cost savings across different directorates, that there's some nuance to that and we take into account the large focus that we are placing on improving our culture.
And well, I can reassure you on that. We've seen the culture change business case. I think we've reached a reasonable position where we know what the funding is over the next 2 years. And Siobhan and I agreed that 2 years was the right period because initially I think it was only 12 or 18 months. But it's a non-recurrent program. It's a 2-year program, so we can fund it from non-recurrent means, and that's quite appropriate. But then we need to then transition after that 2-year period in managing our culture needs to be business as usual work. So I'm pretty comfortable with that as a business case, and we've already worked out how we can afford that.
One part of our culture going forward is sound financial management. And his finance is not a free good, and I think there's a we've got to move from this. I've done a business case, therefore I'm going to get some money. To I've got a case for investment here that needs to be considered against the organisation's priorities, and then I think we obviously have an open process to do that. But culturally, it's one of the big challenges we've got to think in the organisation to really get that through to people. But I think hopefully we get some assurance around the people element. But again, it's not a free good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Just really points of support, really. So when you talk about the cost improvement program or whatever you do, one of the things I've noted, and I know Howard and I have both said this, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been considerable capital investment in make-ready centres. Really good, and I support it. The business cases underpinning those investments were predicated on the basis of improvements in operational efficiency and also cash savings. I haven't seen those delivered. And, the challenge I set you and the rest of the organisation is we need to see that going forward. It's the sort of challenge that you'd get from His Majesty's Treasury, and I'm used to, and we need to get that. Other observation I'll make very quickly is I think you're right about the business case, and we've discussed it and we talk about it. The only thing that I'd say, and I think this is wrong, I think your predecessors used the business case to control expenditure, whereas again, I think what Howard and I have always said is it's strong budgetary control that needs to be in place in CCAM. You have an annual budget, you live within that budget. There is a clear justification if you need to go above or below. So I really, really support that going forward. My only question is, and it may come on this afternoon, what's your target for cash reserves at the year end? Because you're quite right, CCAM has in the past had quite considerable cash reserves, which we've now been utilising. I just wondered where you were aiming to get to at year end.
So I'll deal with the last question first. I anticipate we'll be around 30 million at the end of the year. I wouldn't want it to go any lower than that. I'll be perfectly honest.
No, I agree. That's the answer I wanted.
And I'd feel a lot more I'd feel a lot more comfortable if it was the figure we had at the start of the year. And I think that should be our ambition, because when you have money, you have choice. If you don't have money, your choices become quite narrow quite quickly. The whole idea behind the improvement case is that we are clear of any future investments, including capital investments in make-ready centres, and it will have to be explicit what the cash and other improvements are likely as a byproduct of any investment like that. I can't answer for what went before, but what we are doing is part of the governance changes I'm making within the States is that they're going to be reporting on unit costs by make-ready centre and other centres on a regular basis once I get it up and running. So we can use that as a proxy to say, what have we actually delivered? And if we find our unit costs on the newer make-ready centres are higher than the other centres, then we have some questions to answer. If we find it's the other way round, then at least we can do something to address it. There is one other area we look at, is we're going to look at what other places like West Midlands, etc., are doing, because they're people built on the work that we did on make-ready centres, and sometimes you can get behind the curve because other people have moved on. So we'll do some benchmarking comparisons as well.
Let's also let's not. That's one thing we can celebrate. I mean, the board did sign off on the state strategy, which was around rationalising a lot of moribund and derelict sites we had where our staff had to work from. And I don't think we need to give ourselves. I think perhaps our people with short memories, they don't realise the poor working conditions many of our staff had in some of these distant ambulance stations. So we've made huge changes there, but as you said, we need to make sure we can justify that investment. But there's generally a positive story there. I'm assuming there's some capital receipts to come as well.
It's funny I was going to say something about that. I think we probably need a slightly more rigorous capital disposal programme, because it's nice having built land and buildings. It's better to have cash in the bank. So that's one area I'll be focusing on as well.
Other questions on comments on that section of the report?
There is one question I want to ask just in relation to wellbeing. What is the position on Chertsey? Are we moving that forward, and are our people working there? Is the conditions okay for them?
Chertsey, are you talking about the issue we've had with the flood? Or yes. So we've established a project board for Chertsey. I put in some slightly more rigorous management of that project. I'm now getting regular reports. You will see the Medway report this afternoon. There will be similar reports becoming available on any projects like Chertsey where we've had an insurance claim, and we will do one on Brighton because we had a flood there as well. So I think we're being more rigorous now. I have a better feeling now than when I first came that it's under good control. We know what we're doing. We're hiring our own, what's the term, insurance assessor. I can't remember the term. Sorry?
Loss adjuster.
Loss adjuster, that's the one, thank you. To deal with the water board on Chertsey, and I'm getting regular updates on it. I'll bring something next time.
My main concern was, I think a number of the NEDs visited a couple of months ago when it all happened. It's really to Emma, you're happy about staff well-being there, that they, it's not a good position. They were working out at Chertsey Fire Station, I think, weren't they? Are people happy broadly with that? Or?
Yes, so the only people who are working directly from Chertsey currently are Fleet and Make Ready. Our crews will go there to pick up drugs in the morning because we still use the Omnicell. Chertsey Fire Station is working very well. Surrey Fire and Rescue have been, I thank them personally, but it's been a really good actually working relationship with them. I'll be frank, we've got more people in smaller stations than we would like, so they are also working out of Walton and other places because we don't have any choice. But what we have done is listened to them, and whilst we are making repairs, we are also making some reasonably minor adjustments in the building to create some better space for them. So for those who've been to Chertsey, the mess room is quite small. There was an office next door, so the request has been, whilst we're redoing stuff, can we take that wall out and create an office space upstairs, which is exactly what we're doing. So they'll actually go back to a better building than they left anyway.
That's good to hear. Perhaps our impressive new staff engagement platform, we can make sure that gets fed onto that. So that's some valuable information there for our staff. So thank you. Let's move on then to the item 7422. Sorry, have we all had your say on achieving sustainability, working with patients? Anything else to do on that?
We just need the report from the Finance Committee.
Sorry, Finance Investment Committee report. Howard.
Nothing else to add that hasn't already been covered.
Right. You're satisfied that the financial risks are being addressed in the governance
and I
structure.
look forward to the discussion this afternoon on the new finance report.
And maybe as we get early into the new year, Martin, I think it probably sounds we do need a discussion. I think all these board engagements, I'm sure there will be planned to the finance committee, but the board needs, as we get into the contract discussions and budget for next year, I think we need to be aware what the risks are, and you know, so we're all sighted on the financial plan going forward.
Yes, Howard and I have had a discussion about that as well, and it's and David and I will be bringing regular updates to the board.
Can we move on to 7422, regulatory compliance? David?
Thank you, Chair.
And our priorities.
So we, just conscious of time, I'll take the paper as read and just pick up on a couple of the highlights. Just as a reminder, the improvement journey was the framework we came up with, not only to answer to the CQC, but to put us in a trajectory to deliver sustainable improvements and change at CCAM. We are now what it defined in this moving front, and we've used this phrase, moving from a sprint to a marathon. So what does that mean? And we've heard in the discussions today all the different improvements from the subcomponents. I'm not going to dwell on the individual warning notices, other than what's driving some of this work is achievement against the deliverables that we set back in the summer. And as of writing of this report, we were at 99% virtually completed with the actions that we said we would take. So just conscious of the report that Fiona has presented about not just taking a green and looking good whilst not doing good. We need to be very aware of that comment. So whilst we can say, yeah, we've done all the deliverables that we said we would do, we need to build on those improvements, and now the focus on sustainability needs to come through. We've talked today about how culture will get in the way of improvement, how pressures drive culture. We've talked about quality improvement, and we have a session this afternoon with Joe Turner. And we've talked about how the operating model needs a review, and all of those things need to be in the mix of us thinking about sustainability going forward for this program. In terms of the plan for the next, I'd say, 3 months, and it's something I'm working closely with Rob on, is what will the framework be for the must-do, should-dos, and RSP exit criteria. We have not been reporting on those narrowly within this report, but just to put some numbers in the board's mind, we have something like 60 individual different deliverables, and we've been able to thematically arrange those across 23 different themes. So we will be looking at those themes from a delivery perspective over the next 3 months, whilst utilizing the current structures for delivery that we have. So that will be the compliance regulatory aspect of the plans going forward. But our focus will start to shift as well to become more strategically driven as well. And the conversations that we've been having today, and part of the actions we've taken in terms of staff wellbeing, operational model, are all those that I'm going to encourage the board to be continued to seek assurance on as we move on. And we will start to separate the aspects of regulatory compliance, being how the board gains assurance against must-do's progress, but we will start also talking about how do we build on our strategic priorities. And you have a paper in front of you that summarizes the outcomes of the 2 sessions that we had. You've seen this at the Council of Governors, but we had a workshop session with the Council of Governors back in November, and the executive had a session with the senior management group to start shaping what our strategic priorities for next year need to look like. Define those as draft, and I know the executive will be spending some time in January refining those and translating them into then what does it mean for executive level objectives, and then what does that mean for team level objectives, and that's part of the work that Martin has been alluding to. So that's what's going to start giving us continuity. We've been talking about how we need to involve more of our people in the improvement journey, and by making the improvement journey part of everybody's objectives for next year as part of this framework is going to be one of the ways we will start to A, create sustainability, B, have more of a impact, because we know that a lot of the focus has been on board well-led focus, which is where the warning notice was, rightly so, up until the 18th of November when the warning notice expired. The risk will continue to be rated as a 12, until which point the CQC give us some feedback on the progress made to date, and that will be in January. So we will keep it at that way up until then. I think the key risks the board needs to be aware of going forward, and I've highlighted those in the paper, are in particular around how will we achieve sustainability. Now, we have a session around quality improvement this afternoon, so I think we can carry on some of the discussion later, but how we bring all of this together, working in system partnership, delivering quality improvement, but also addressing the strategic objectives and how the board gains assurance against what it said it will do, are essential pieces of the puzzle. We've talked about here in Treat I think as a good example of where we've done a lot of activity but not quite been able to get the outcomes that we wanted from an improvement perspective. So we will need to reflect on how do we set up we say we're going to do this strategic objective and really give the people the tools, structures and processes they need to be able to affect that change as part of our improvements going forward. Nothing else that I'd like to highlight because I think everything is already covered in the paper, but I'll happy to take questions, David.
Thank you. I mean, just one particular point, if I may, just to start the discussion, in theme of, delivering on our promises. I mean, I took from the paperwork that we are making substantial improvements, progress on the improvement notices, and because they the first part, that's the first part of that's the sprint. We've got the marathon to come. But is there anything you wanted to flag up or concern around improvement notices? Are we making progress? Given we're in a public meeting, is it important?
Yeah, so
we
that's
demonstrate
fine.
we're at the.
I can pick up, and if we reflect on each one of the warning notices, I think we've had a good discussions around all aspects today. So if you think about warning notice 1 and talking about board disconnect, we've seen how the board is now more connected. And through the chair's report, we do the leadership visits, we have thematic reviews, and we have some really good discussions around, how culture is driven by the operational pressures and our role in protecting our staff from those operational pressures and striking the right balance. That tells me the board is more connected to some of the real issues. And we've talked about how the board has developed a framework for strategic priorities for next year that we will utilize to cascade into next year, further helping us with that alignment. So that, for me, gives us that continuity of warning notice 1. Warning notice 2, which is about qualitative information, we've seen where the IQR has got leaps and bounds and how we've linked it to some of the cultural learnings from the East Kent maternity review. So I think that's a really good example. And I think the work we've talked about, data quality, is essential in now taking the work we've done for the IQR to the next level. And by the next level, I mean, how do we empower a group of OUs in Kent to be able to look at their issues in the same way that we look at it at the board at a high level. And that's the work that the team are focused on now from a data engineering and data science perspective, getting all of that mechanisms in architecture in the background working. Some of the work that Martin has mentioned around the governance reviews that we're doing, Rob's done a lot of work on the clinical governance review, and I think 11 different groups have had new terms of reference. And we're doing something similar now with the corporate side of the governance, because that needs to be working hand in hand to be able to provide the executive with the right escalations. And some of the reflections we've had as an executive team is, whilst we receive executive dashboard reports, that doesn't mean much unless we hear from the people who are delivering against those different subcomponents. And I think we've heard plenty around the progress made on the warning notice 4, in particular around culture and some of the trends that Howard's picked up in terms of increased suspensions, increased reporting. But it's very early days, and I think my message, David, would be it's about continuous improvement, and we need to build on these now as part of the next stage.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. And but also no complacency. There's still a lot to do, but the marathon's is about to start. Yeah, thank you. Right, Siobhan.
I just wonder, David, if we've worked out the timeline about the strategic priorities. So I think it's definitely the right time for us to start thinking beyond the regulatory detail that the warning notices has given us focus for, and that I think when we do the presentation and talk to the CQC in the middle of January, that feels like absolutely the right time frame for us to also share with the CQC that the sustainable improvement and continuous improvement is now top of the board's agenda. The reason I ask is, so at the end of the paper, we've got the small table with the strategic priorities. And I know we say that the exec team are going to be iterating that. However, just a reminder that it is the task of the board to set the strategy for the organisation. So whilst the board would probably expect the exec team to come with a worked up set of ideas, the board will need to co-design the strategic priorities for next year. And so I'm just checking what our forward plan is to do that in time for the start of 23-24 with the board. And if we haven't got that yet, we can take it away as an action with Peter to schedule. But just your thoughts.
I think we have predicted this already, but I think it's a very good challenge, Siobhan. We need to make sure that the board does sign this off.
I think that's the answer, Siobhan. I think we know in January we will start the process of cascading some of the objectives down through to executive and departmental levels. So it's essential that in January we find the time as part of the board development to follow up. Obviously, these have come up out of the initial session that the board did with the Council of Governors, which I think is very important. But I think it'd be great to have some more quality time as a board to just get these over the line, maybe with a bit more detail. I'd suggest it's not helpful for the board to look at this and wordsmith this. I think that it's worthwhile the board spending a bit of time looking at then what are the executive delivery plans that sit under this as part of that exercise.
Yeah, so what I'm kind of used to is a set of corporate objectives with measurable milestones coming to the board every quarter, and but the starting point has to be that the board sets that standard of priorities and objectives at board level together. So I guess I'm just flagging that probably what we don't want to do is the exec team to sit in a dark room, work a bunch of stuff up and say, here you go. We've got to take the board on the journey, because the deliverables will probably need to be monitored at subcommittee level as well as more formally at board level. So just really to make sure we get enough total board involvement in the final drafting and in the agreement to the deliverables, the high level deliverables that sit underneath.
Comments on what we have in plan.
Yeah, no. It's just to add to that really. So when Steve returns from leave, just need to work out the timing of it. So we have the date of the 18th of January, some time after the CQC session with the board, and just remind colleagues in the paper that we still earlier on board development. We referenced the well-led self-assessment. So arising from that, I think we need to build a timeline for delivering a new developing a new strategy for the trust over the next sort of 12 months. But in the meantime, looking at the strategic priorities that David refers to, and the journey of the board has started. We've gone into a darkened room because we had the joint board and council governors meeting, didn't we, where some of these outputs derived. That's right, isn't it, David?
100% of these outcomes derived from that. So I think we are not doing any work in parallel. So I think that is right. So I do think there's a little bit of work that we need to do to come prepared to that session so the board get the most out of it, because the executive will need to do the thinking about how do we enable this change. But I think that timing with the well-led in the third week of January is the right one.
January is a busy time of year. Let's make sure we program the dates in so people are aware. But I think time invested in January will save time later in the year having to revisit this. So commend the approach.
It's just, if you think about work back, it's important we get to 1st of April with absolute clarity about what is it the board will be delivering in the year. And I think that's the objective we're working.
We need signed contracts, agreed commissioning plans, agreed plans of the commissioners, and we need to know what we're doing. So no, absolutely. So that's really good. Any other points from David? So I think, David, well, first of all, thank you. I think the board pleased to note the progress on the improvement notices, and I think that's important. It's important about our own confidence, never mind building credibility with those that commission our services and those we serve. So I think that's an important milestone. I think we've also heard that we're getting plans in place to further embellish the improvement journey to make sure that we're fit for the marathon with suitable refreshment stops along the way to make sure that we do take stock of where we are and we make progress. So thank you for that. We've got that timetable for January. Are there any other questions the board wish to make on this? Your comments? You're satisfied with that, are you? Thank you. Let's move on, moving towards the conclusion of the meeting. If I just find my agenda. I think now we're just moving on now to sort of board effectiveness and just a sort of quick sort of a wash up really in terms of we've heard some comments about new ways of working, and David gave a very eloquent linking together of the work that we're doing, leading to difference in the way the board conducts itself. Basically, are you content you're getting the quality of information and issues onto the table for the board to discharge your responsibility? Because we're all collectively responsible. So are you able to look those that we serve in the eye and say you are getting the information you need? So colleagues, board effectiveness, information on the table, areas for improvement. Are you content? Simon says, obviously we're being watched, and so not everyone is seen. Just a report for the camera, and the tape. People are nodding, and there's a positive acclamation from the board. They're happy with the progress. David.
Thank you, Chair. I think two things. One, I commended Howard for using the special cost variation, cost for concern, low trend, high trend failure. I think I'd like to see more of that. I think that was really spot on language, that was noted. Howard. Yep. And I think it came through in the way the executives were presenting the papers, and you could see it come through. But I think if we are more explicit of calling it out, that will just really help us embrace the methodology. And then secondly, I think part of what we've talked about here, and I think one of the things that this board has not done because we don't have those structures in place, is look at those packages that Siobhan's described. That says in Q1 we will do A, B, C, and D, and then go specifically back to those A, B, C, and D, because then that's what gives us the opportunity to get that immediate learning. Is this working? Is it not? What do we need to do for Q2? So I think as we develop this program, we need to think, how will this help us get even better board assurance as we go into next year by having those quarterly type targets set that we deliver against.
Well, I'll work with the Chief Executive and the Company Secretary to make sure we do have a clear timetable in terms of certain key times in the year, because we're sort of rationalising the number of public board meetings we have in order to be more effective. Therefore, we need to be more disciplined about what we're going to discuss at these meetings. So we'll have a clear timetable for that for sure. Any other reflections on the business of the board today and how we're conducting ourselves?
Just one thing on the notes I'd taken before the meeting was on the IQR was the new stats on the vehicles. So when I joined CCAM, I assumed that there would be a lot of issues around vehicle maintenance and management. But there's a remarkable absence of that. And the statistics that show seem to indicate that of all the challenges that we have, that doesn't seem to be one of them. Now, that does triangulate, so I've never had any, during visits, any complaints on that front, other than the obvious Fiat issue. But in terms of general cleanliness, operations, maintenance, and vehicle off-road, it never seems to feature, and it never features on the board. And the statistics seem to support that and saying it isn't a problem. So that's really good.
Yeah, good job. David?
I think it is, and I regularly go down to our workshops and ask the team, is there anything else that you need? And the answer is no. It's quite surprising. I think we've had local issues, so I mean you can see it in the chart referring to page 45 of the IQR, where we had a drip in planned services that was because of vehicle maintenance technician shortfall. So we've had issues with recruiting because vehicle maintenance technicians don't go to NHS jobs to find a job. So the team are now doing really good work with HR to recruit through Indeed and other platforms that are more common. And that was also aligned to when we had the loss of Chertsey, which meant we couldn't do the planned vehicle maintenance. But you can see that was recovered then in the following 2 periods. My caution note on this, and the vehicle off-road is around 11%, which is quite good, is whether and the reduction, of course, of critical vehicle failures, is we don't have enough good information to benchmark ourselves. So we've tried to get that to the mobile ambulance. We're going through other routes. So we know we have good, but what I struggled to just get that over the line, Howard, is what's the benchmark information? What's the vehicle failure rate of other organisations? We know the one piece we've done benchmarking has been with road traffic collisions, because we have the same insurer than everybody else. And we are a top quartile in terms of safety and reporting of RTCs. So that is encouraging. So all the signs say that we don't have a particular area of issue. Of course, one of the things that we'll have to be looking at, in particular in the context of financial constraints, is if we start constraining our fleet investment plan, what are the consequences of that, and then make the right decisions.
Let's go into detail now. I think it's a fair challenge. I think let's find a way of actually bringing this out, because it's obviously crucial to quite a large number of our staff. It is the major clinical workspace of this organisation. We just happen to do what other healthcare organisations do. We do it on wheels. So actually, it's really important. It's a really important facility, and I think just a bit more visibility on some of those issues would be helpful. So not a criticism, I think, but you already demonstrate, David, there's an impressive grasp of those issues we haven't had before the board before. So can I just say let's do some work in the finance committee to get some key metrics. With us all becoming experts in, we've got enough to be experts in. Let's get the key issues which impact on patient safety and on staff welfare, and obviously utilisation of scarce resources. Fiona?
Thank you, Chair. Do we have a delivery date yet for the replacement cars for OTLs and CCPs? I know that there has been a long delay because of issues around semiconductors. But it has taken a very long time. Do you have a delivery date?
Yeah, so you're referring to the Skoda Kodiaqs that were ordered before I started. So at least 14 months since they were ordered. We don't have a date yet. It's a real challenge for the Skoda Kodiaqs. But I'll take that away and come back to you, Fiona. But it is
whether we need to source another vehicle. But anyway, let's leave that to the experts to decide. Anything else on board effectiveness?
just one. I agree with the comments around, and gradually I think we are getting better on the quality of information and discussion of stuff. But I think the only thing I think is that one of the other metrics should be tracking is actually the board meetings are still just as long. So we seem to have better quality information, better discussion. But
based on the timetable, I'm only 10 minutes over. So
I wasn't making a comment on that. I was just saying, in general, we're still doing 4 or 5 hour meetings, and that's a long time for.
Can I say that I think you need to be really careful. 4 hours. Don't think that is because people's energy levels, the quality. I commend everybody keeping, but 4 hours, David, is too long. It really is, and I think we need a fundamental redesign. I understand where we are, but I don't think we should disguise length with effectiveness, because I don't think that is the case.
I couldn't agree. I agree with you, absolutely. Okay, can we conclude then and have some lunch? I don't think there's any other business.